hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, October 23rd, 2023. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Etten.
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, we have our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who's on my right at the end of the dais, and our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, who's on my left at the other end of the dais. We also have a number of staff and others who will be participating in the meeting, and introductions will be made as those folks are come into the meeting. I do want to remind folks, if you have a cell phone, to be sure and silence it, or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting this evening. If you need extra copies of meeting materials or the agenda specifically, the agenda is available in multiple copies on the back table under the clock in the back of the chambers. We also have a master copy of all the meeting materials in the big binder in the back that can be referred to by members of the public if needed. Let's see what else from a housekeeping point of view. I guess we don't have any remote participants this evening. So the only other thing I'll mention then is that the next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll ask folks to stand if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next on the agenda is approval of tonight's agenda, and as always, we'll start with staff. Mr. Trudgeon, are there any changes to the agenda that need to be made from a staff perspective this evening?
Yes, there is, Mr. Mayor. As I mentioned in an earlier email to the council, item 7B, which is to consider request to perform an abatement for unresolved violations of city code at 2170 Cohansey Boulevard, can be removed. The property owner has corrected the violations and has current tabs on the vehicle and blew up the flat tire, so it is no longer in violation of city code and it can be removed from the agenda and not taken up.
All right. Are there any changes that council members would like to make to the agenda this evening, or items council members would like removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration? Seeing none from the rest of the council, there is one that I would like removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration, and that is item 10E. I just have a slight, I guess you might say, technical change I'd like to make to the ordinance, and so in order to cover that, I would like that removed for separate consideration. Great. And then also we do check with the public. So section 10 of our agenda, which starts at the bottom of the first page and continues on to the second page, it's called the consent agenda, items A through J. These items are normally taken up as a single motion without a lot of opportunity for discussion or input. They're usually fairly administrative in nature and do not require a lot of extensive discussion by the council. That's why we hold those at the end of the meeting. But if anybody is here this evening for an item in section 10 specifically, 10A through J, once again under consent agenda, starting at the bottom of the first page and continuing on to the second page, and you wish to make a comment or ask a question about one of those items, we can take that item up earlier in the meeting and give you your opportunity to do that if you're so inclined. So we'll double check with folks. If you're here for an item to speak or ask a question about an item, once again in section 10, items 10A through J, towards the end of the agenda, this would be a chance to let us know, and we can make sure and take up that particular item earlier in the meeting and allow you not to have to stay to the end to make your comment or ask your question. Is there anyone here this evening to speak to or ask a question about an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? Does not appear to be the case. So we have then the staff requested change, the removal of item 7B from business items. We have the council requested change, item 10E being considered separately from our consent agenda. With that as the amended agenda, is there a motion to approve as amended?
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Any discussion on that motion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. Next on the agenda is public comment, and I should note for members of the public, we will have opportunities for public comment as various agenda items come up over the course of the evening. So if you're here for a particular item, you will have a chance to speak to that item. But we also, at the start of each meeting, do provide an opportunity for general public comment, which is a chance for people in the public to speak to items either related to city business or of interest to people in the community that are not on tonight's agenda. Once again, we'll have a chance later in the meeting for folks to speak on agenda items as they come up. But if there is anyone here who wishes to speak in general public comment on an item not in tonight's agenda, this would be an opportunity to do so. As we have a member of the public coming up, we'll just note once again the rules for public comment. We have a 3-minute time limit per speaker. I almost changed the rules there. And we ask that you begin your comments with your name and either your address or street for the record, and then address comments or questions to the council. We'll then either direct staff to follow up, or if we can provide an answer at the time, we'll do that if there is a question that needs to be responded to. The other thing I'll note that if you have a name that may not be readily recognizable as to how to spell it, when you're finished with your comments, there is a clipboard. You can step off to the side and put your name on the clipboard just so we have that for the spelling for the official record. Hopefully I've covered everything. Usually the only other thing, which we'll get to when we get to public comment on agenda items, everybody kind of gets one bite of the apple in terms of public comment. We don't have sort of the ability to speak and then come back and then speak and come back. So try to make sure you cover everything you want to in your 3 minutes that's allotted. And the only other thing I'll say is if you have any written testimony, you can certainly hand that to Mr. Trudgeon at the end of the dais, and that will be made available to the council as well, in case you can't cover everything within your 3 minutes. With all that, thank you for your patience, Mr. Hess. Welcome to public comment this evening.
Hey, Roger Hess Jr., Wagner Place in Roseville, Minnesota. And I'm not related to Rudy Hess, who spoke a couple of meetings ago.
Good.
Which I'm guessing he's a neo-Nazi and thinks he's Rudolph Hess, but anyway, it looks like you're going to be making a new park and also reconstructing one, and one is going to have a multiple basketball hoop area. And it would be nice if you guys would include a toddler height hoop one of these days somewhere in our park system, because little kids like to shoot baskets and they can't right now at any of the parks. Anyway, and then moving snow is one of the most important things you guys do, is one of the most basic things. And for some reason, when there's a large snowfall, you can't plow 24 hours. Like last January, we had a huge snowfall, and by 5 p.m. our roads were impassable. I couldn't even get from Rice Street to a block and a half away to my house because you couldn't get through. And you weren't plowing until 2 the next morning, which didn't make much sense. And the National Weather Service claims we could have just as much snow this year as last year. So I wish you would, if you have to readjust the budget or whatever, find a way that the 2 or 3 big snowfalls, you can keep the plows moving, because that would be very nice. And lastly, seems like every year there's some issue that comes up, says that our levy has to go up a whole bunch. And it would be nice if we could see in the packet when you're talk about the budget, if you could see what the increase has been each year for the last 5 or 10 years. Because it seems like every year something comes up, like this year it's compensation. So I'd just like to see that. And if we can somehow spread the compensation thing over 2 or 3 years would be nice. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your comments this evening. Is there anyone else from the public for general comment on non-agenda items this evening? Seeing no one else come forward, then we'll close the opportunity for general public comment and proceed with our agenda. Next on the agenda is a proclamation. It's a proclamation relative to Native American Heritage Month, and I'll read the proclamation, and then a motion from the council would be in order. The proclamation reads as follows. The city of Roseville is located on land obtained through a broken treaty that was first home to the Dakota and Ojibwe people, and where many continue to reside. And whereas the city of Roseville recognizes that this treaty entitled non-native people to live and work on traditional native lands, and whereas despite centuries-long and ongoing erasure of indigenous people from American history and unjust federal policies of assimilation and termination that rip children from their families, Native American people have persevered. And whereas the indigenous people of this land upon which our country and city now stand have provided values and ideas that have become ingrained in American culture, including respect for the natural environment and rich cultural history. And whereas the City of Roseville is committed to promoting racial equity, equality, and justice as fundamental aspects of a safe and welcoming community, and to undo the longstanding trauma and harm of unjust governmental policies of assimilation and termination that have cost countless lives and displaced and broken up families. And whereas the City of Roseville invites all members of the community to join the federal government in celebrating and acknowledging the 2023 National Native American Heritage Month, and whereas this observance offers increased opportunity to better understand Native American heritage, past and present contributions to our communities, and to honor the many Indigenous people who have sacrificed their lives and customs for the growth of our nation. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the City of Roseville hereby proclaims the month of November 2023 as Native American Heritage Month.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, second by Councilmember Etten, to adopt that proclamation. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving that motion, that proclamation, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That proclamation is approved. Next on our agenda then is the one item removed from the consent agenda, and that is item 10E. And as usual, we'll have Mr. Trudgeon introduce the item and then recognize the council member who had it removed. Mr. Trudgeon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, this is an item we're considering adoption of an ordinance amendment to the zoning code to make allowances for micro-unit dwellings to be placed in sacred communities as a permitted accessory use. As you know, the sacred community is a new law that was passed in the last legislative session that allows for mini or micro units to be placed on a church property or adjacent to a church property. So this ordinance amendment would then now allow that as a permitted accessory unit on those properties that meet the qualifications under the state statutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. The excuse me, the ordinance that's in the packet had one very relatively minor but probably meaningful technical correction needed, and that is on line 9. It says, "and designated volunteers that meet the requirements," and it actually should say that meets the requirements because it's referring back up to line 6, a settlement that meets, so that's the proper grammatical construction there. But probably more substantively, and I think, Mr. Trudgeon, if you could pass that down to the council members and anyone else who needs it. In section 2, we're inserting the language, adding the ability to do the sacred communities into sort of a general requirement or category in our standards language. And I noted as I was reviewing it that we do have already in our code a church and religious institutions section under our standards, under civic and institutional uses. And so my suggestion to make it slightly easier, it's may be a minor change, but to make it a little bit easier for people to find this language, being that we already have a section that refers to churches and religious institutions in that part of the code, it made more sense to me, instead of having this sort of as a standalone general paragraph, to kind of put it in with the church and religious institution. So that's the proposal that I'm suggesting this evening we consider adopting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I did check with staff, and I think staff also checked with the attorney and didn't see necessarily an issue with this. And, you know, it would work, I think, either way. I think it just makes it a little easier to find as people are trying to use and interpret our code. Any questions from this council on this? Councilmember Stern.
I was just wondering, because there is language within the statute that indicates the percentage of people that need to be designated volunteers versus those who are experiencing chronic homelessness. I know it's within the statute and that could change at some point. Is there any reason or need to include that particular piece within this?
I may defer to staff and the attorney on that question, but my take would be is that I think in cases where we're referencing state statutes, it's usually wise to try to be as general as you can in case the statute itself
Right.
changes. And so that's up in the definition section, I believe, is what you're referring to, Councilmember Strawn.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, like I said, if staff or attorney has any contrary point on that, it doesn't seem to be the case.
Staff would concur. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Other questions from the council? We'll check if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this proposed ordinance. Once again, this is an ordinance to allow for these sacred communities on church and religious institution properties, which cities are required to do by state law. We just need to accomplish that through a change to our code, and that's the item before us this evening with, as I noted, a suggested change on my part to slightly relocate where we put that language in our code. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item at this time? Seeing no one, we can proceed to council consideration. So we have either the staff recommended ordinance or the suggested alternative from the mayor, and I would be open to a motion for either.
I would move that we adopt the mayor's version.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff to adopt the bench handout version with the relocation of the language in section 2 of the ordinance. Discussion on that motion. Councilmember Schroeder is the maker of the motion. Councilmember Groff as the seconder.
No, this brings us in compliance with state law, which is what we have to do, and I think it accomplishes our mission.
All right. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll just express my appreciation to the council for considering that change and to staff also for working with me and getting to this point this evening. With that, we've got the motion before us to approve the ordinance, once again, the bench handout as presented, which allows sacred communities in our city as a permitted use as outlined. All those in favor of that motion to adopt that ordinance signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That ordinance is approved. And I would note that because of the short length of the ordinance, we did not include an ordinance summary for publication, so no action is required on an ordinance summary. That brings us then to our regularly scheduled items on the agenda. And our first item this evening, item 7A, is to hold a public hearing to consider approving an on-sale liquor license for La Familia Tapatia, doing business as La Tapatia, located at 2730 Snelling Avenue. And I believe, Mr. Trudgeon, you're introducing this item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As mentioned, this is a public hearing to consider approval of an on-sale liquor license for La Tapatia at 2730 Snelling Avenue. They currently have a wine and beer license, and they've held that since 2021. We've had no issues with their operations or any violations. They're looking to get a full liquor license with Sunday sales starting beginning of 2024. So they'll continue to operate, is my understanding, with the wine and beer license for the remainder of the year, and then go to the full liquor license with Sunday sales. They already have an outdoor endorsement, and that stays in place. So this action tonight would grant them the on-sale liquor license with Sunday sales. And this is a public hearing, so we do need to open it up for any particular comments. I believe representatives from La Tapatia are here if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. First, are there any questions from the council for staff on this particular request? No. All right. Does a representative of La Tapatia wish to speak to their request? It's totally optional, but you can if you want.
Just gonna make him limp up.
I think I said it's totally optional.
You need a hand mic.
Hello.
And if you could just introduce yourselves. Welcome.
Armando Ponce.
And Marta Ponce, the mom.
Yeah. I live in St. Paul, so do I still say the address?
You're fine. You're a representative of the applicant this
okay.
evening, so that's the function with which you're speaking.
Just nothing. Just thankful that we're still in Roseville and hopefully to continue being in here. My mother and I have started the business, and also Abraham. Unfortunately, he can't be here because he's on daddy duties. But I mean, just thankful.
Thank you.
Yeah, just being in Roseville, and hopefully we get it approved and continue being following laws and stuff like that, and hopefully we don't have any problems in the future or anything like that at all. But thank you for letting us continue to be in Roseville, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right, well, we have to make your time up here worthwhile, so I'll ask you a question. So the request is to sort of expand the type of license you have to be able to serve all sorts of alcohol, not just beer and wine. So you're envisioning that that's going to be an improvement to your business model, I'm
Yes.
guessing.
Yeah, because my mother comes from Guadalajara, so that's where tequila is made. So that's why we kind of just want to bring that culture again to Roseville and to everyone to get a little bit more knowledge, obviously. But yeah, and hopefully make our business a little bit better than what it is. But yeah.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant from the council?
Thank you.
Thank you again for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, once again, this is a public hearing. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to this request for if you will, an enhancement of the liquor license already held by this establishment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item at this time? All right, seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing and move to council consideration. We have the request before us to approve the sort of full on-sale liquor license, if you will. Is there a motion from the council?
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, second by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on the motion as the maker of the motion, Councilmember Strawn.
No, I appreciate that you continue to have your business here and that it's thriving, and that you also participate in community events. We appreciate you as a community partner, so thank you.
As the seconder, Councilmember Etten.
No, we appreciate your good food. Thanks for being here.
All right, any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we have the motion before us to approve that license change or that new type of license for this establishment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That license is approved. Congratulations and best of luck to you. Or continued best of luck. With that then, as was noted, item 7B is no longer under consideration this evening because that property owner came into compliance with the code violations. That'll bring us then to 7C, which is to consider approval of 2 pathway segments in Roseville. And with us this evening, we have our Public Works Director, Jesse Freihammer, as well as our Engineer, Jennifer Lowry, with us this evening to introduce this item. So I'll turn it over to them to begin the conversation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to do just a quick presentation. I think that might help give a little more background to explain the packet since there was a large amount of material. So with that, I'll get into my presentation and open up for questions at the end. So tonight we're talking about Tamarack Park pathway. That is the pathway shown in red that would go from the western cul-de-sac into the park. That would be a continuation. We're kind of calling this phase 2. Phase 1 was the orange segment which connected out to Farrington Street. And then the second part is the Wagner pathway. That would connect the Wagner cul-de-sac to the western cul-de-sac, and that's shown in blue. So a little background on on Tamarack. Kind of the overall goal of this pathway is to provide a non-motorized connection into the park. This was shown, as indicated in the graphic on the right, as part of the 2010 Parks and Rec Master Plan. We did construct phase 1 in 2018. Phase 2 was originally planned for 2020. It did get delayed. There was concerns from the residents. It also was not in the actual, even though it was in the Parks Master Plan, it was not in the Pathway Master Plan, so we did take some additional action on that. So with the Pathway Master Plan, in April of 2021, the Public Works Environment and Transportation Commission did some initial feedback and study on it. We did send public notices out on, there were actually 6 segments that were proposed as part of this. Tamarack was one of them. We did that in June. And then in July, at that Public Works Commission meeting, we did hold a public hearing, received input, but PWET ultimately recommended approval of that. And then in October 11th of 2021, Council did also do a similar process and did end up approving and adding this segment to the Pathway Master Plan. This attachment just shows what the current Pathway Master Plan is, so that segment is segment 33. The segment does also include going up Western to connect to McCarran's. That is not part of the current proposed project. We would only be doing the connection from Western into the park. So the improvements, we would utilize the existing 30 feet of platted right-of-way that we have and some of the parkland. This would be a construction of an 8-foot bituminous trail similar to phase 1. It would be signed for non-motorized transportation. Similar to other pathways, vehicular use would need to be permitted by the Parks and Rec director. We typically do not allow normal use, but we have made some exceptions for construction, but rare use, not everyday use on that park. Estimated construction cost is estimated at $110,000. There is park renewal funds remaining for that. If approved, we would complete the final plans. We do have this project pretty much ready to go because it was ready in 2020, but we'd combine this with other projects, bring it back for council approval of the bids in early 2024, and we would do construction in the summer of 2024. Public feedback, we did notify the entire neighborhood. We overlapped this with the Wagner neighborhood, so they got notified of both projects. But we did a pretty wide area down there. We did have a few comments to date, and those are included as attachment 3. And then we did get one late comment, which was attached as a bench handout. And then we did include all the prior feedback that we received with the Pathway Master Plan approval, and that was included as attachment 4. So there's a lot of feedback that was received both at Public Works Commission as well as at Council. So staff's recommendation on Tamarack Pathway would be to authorize staff to finalize plans for the Tamarack Pathway and advertise for bids. So Wagner Pathway, this one is similar, a lot of history on this one as well. So back in 2004, the city did vacate the south 30 feet. So there was a historical 60-foot right-of-way between the two cul-de-sacs. In 2004, one of the property owners in the south petitioned the city to vacate. We did vacate the south 30 feet. In 2005, the city did vacate, or it was also petitioned to vacate the north half. We did vacate that with the condition that a utility easement was retained because there is existing utilities under the cul-de-sac, as well as a pathway dedication would need to be granted. Parks and Rec staff had wanted to retain a corridor for a planned pathway that would make connections not only to Reservoir Woods, Ramsey County Open Space, Tamarack Park, and Lake McCarran. So kind of the overall parks constellation concept of getting connectivity to parks. So easements were dedicated in 2006 as part of that. One of the residents, the Rollingers, did kind of point out, they showed us a copy of their document shortly before the meeting. It appears, the city was under the impression we had a full 30 feet for the trail easement. It appears there's 30 feet for the utility easement, we only have 10 feet. So we still have easement to do it, but a little different than what we had thought prior to this. We thought we had the full 30, but we'll confirm that, but just there's a little bit of a twist that we will have to finalize. So the improvements, like I said, we thought we had 30 feet. If we only have 10, we still have a trail easement to construct that in. If we do an 8-foot trail, we have still room for 8. We also could consider doing a little narrower trail if need be. Either way, this would be signed for not similar to other trails, would be signed for non-motorized transportation. We do know that is a concern of the neighborhood. There's existing cut-through traffic that periodically will cut through the short cul-de-sac. It is only 300 feet, so it looks like it. I believe some of the trees were planted in the past to try to prevent that. The estimated construction for this project would be about $50,000. It would be constructed with pathway funds. And then if approved, staff would complete final plans similar to the Tamarack, bring those to bid in early 2024. And then if approved, we would construct this in 2024. So public feedback, we did meet on site with, I met one time and Jennifer met the other time, but we did meet 2 times with the property owners directly adjacent to the trail. We did one meeting in June, the other in September. We also notified the entire neighborhood with the Tamarack pathway for this mailing. As I mentioned, the comments we received to date are included as attachment 3. Staff's recommendation would be to authorize staff to finalize plans and for the Wagner pathway and advertise for bids. So with that, I will turn it over to council for any questions that either myself or Jennifer can answer, and yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Freihammer. Questions from the council for staff on either of these 2 proposed pathway segments? Councilmember Adden.
I have a question probably for Mr. Johnson, if you could come up, Park and Rec Director.
Good evening, Council, Mayor.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I know that a concern for a lot of the folks who are here is around access, and currently wondering what would happen with their access, and it mentions there would be a permitting process for some limited access. Can you speak to what that process might be?
Yeah.
The Tamarack portion.
That's Tamarack portion, yes. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Council. Typically and historically, we've had a few occasions with which we have granted case-by-case access, usually as it relates to maintenance. So we've had situations where somebody need to have a tree removed from their backyard, or they need to get a trailer added to their backyard, or some kind of these one-off. And it's simply a request to myself as the Parks and Recreation Director. We Typically, we'll grant it with very narrow parameters on must be done on such date, must be conducted at a speed of less than 10 miles per hour, must access via this identified route to ensure we're not endangering the natural resources. You almost have these two competing interests here in this specific instance, where we absolutely would need to regulate access, because one of the concerns from the neighbors on the east side is people simply driving through the park and creating that pass through. So it couldn't be carte blanche. Additionally, anytime you have public on a pathway, you're inherently inviting them in, and you do run into that issue of one driver who's driving through the alley looking at their phone or something like that, while a kid is on a strider bike coming around the corner. You know, those are things that keep me up at night. So I would say, again, on a case by case, if it's somebody needs to pull in a boat once per fall and once per spring, if they can identify this is what the need is, this is the access path, this is the day I plan on doing it, we would certainly consider that. But I think it can't really go beyond that functionally without really deviating from what the city's approach to park pathways has been. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Don't go away necessarily. There might be other questions for staff from council on the proposal for either two segments. Councilmember Groff.
How does this work with the information we have that the easement is only 10 feet now then?
So this is back to the Wagner Street
Wagner one.
Oh, I see, okay, then that is not gonna matter, it does not apply, thanks.
I did want to just follow up on when you permit people to use a pathway for, say, putting a boat away or something like that, or maybe more appropriate is if somebody is having a tree removed, do you put any kind of requirements about perhaps blocking off the pathway or signage or anything like that to kind of warn the public about that activity?
Correct. Historically, it's a pass-through, and what we've done is simply issued them a letter and said, you know, this is the exact time you can go in, this is the exact time to leave. I can think of one instance where we've had somebody that's actually had heavy equipment in there, and that's exactly what we did, is we required signage to essentially identify that a hazard was coming ahead. And so, again, if it's a once in, if we can get the specific time, specific place, that tends to work. If it's more all over the place than that, it gets to be more tricky, and we've, had to kind of sort through that a little bit more.
Okay, so if it's just accessing, it's not quite as complicated.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Right, any other questions for staff, for any of our staff on any of the proposals? Councilmember Bratton.
I think my other question may be back to Mr. Fram or Ms. Lowry, but can you talk about how we can work, there's some things in the RCA, but how we can work to limit vehicle drive-through, that piece of that concern?
Yeah, so we have a few historical spots, other pathways in the city that we've had the same issue on. A real close one, which we actually did this year, was the Marion Street pathway next to the Enclave development. That was a pathway constructed about 2 or 3 years ago, similar 8-foot wide pathway, but we did have some complaints over the summer that, hey, cars were cutting through when we were doing the phase 2 improvements. So we did install some like planter bollards and boulders, something that we can move if we need to, but to make it narrow where you can't do that. But the advantage of that is we can, when we need it wider to plow in the winter, we can move that back. So we've done that there. We've done some over by Langton Park where we've had cut throughs, but we'll also always put signage in for sure to make it very clear that it's not. So that's one thing. There is currently no signage that it's obviously not paved right now between the two cul-de-sacs, so it's obviously shouldn't be, but signage will help make it enforceable, as well as I know we're going to look at other signage in the neighborhood to make sure we have it signed properly for no outlets and dead ends. There's probably a little bit of work that could be done there because they are two cul-de-sacs. There should not be a lot of traffic theoretically going there, but we can certainly look to improve that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Back on the Wagner connection, one of the things that I was looking at in the consideration of this was sort of other examples of pathway connections sort of between properties. And I know there's probably something in the neighborhood of a handful in Roseville. I can think of one, I think it's between B2 and Grandview, actually just sort of southeast of here. I know over by Brimhall School, there's a couple connections northbound towards the school in the center of a couple blocks. In my review of those cases, I don't think very many of them had any kind of fencing or plantings along those corridors. They seem to be pretty open. But my understanding is that the city's policy in regard to that is that it's generally the property owner's choice as to whether fencing or plantings are installed for the benefit of the property or to help isolate the pathway. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we will certainly make sure it's signed so people know where the right-of-way is and what it is, but I think establishing a permanent pathway here will help do that. I know that was one of the concerns is the easement area is very undefined right now, so people kind of walk where they go, especially in the winter. I think in the summer, the path is pretty clear and people are probably following it, but we'll certainly make sure it's signed appropriately if we need to put 2 posts on the corner or something.
Great. Thank you. No other questions from the council at this time? All right, staff, thank you. Then we will open it up for public comment on both of these 2 segments. And once again, just to review the public comment process, we do have a 3-minute time limit per speaker. You can say quite a bit in 3 minutes. Trust us. And if you do have additional information that's written down that you're not able to cover in your written, or excuse me, in your spoken testimony, you can certainly once again provide that to Mr. Trudgeon. We ask again that you begin your comments with your name and either your street or address to help identify for the record. And once again, if your spelling of your name is something that we're likely to get it wrong, go ahead and write your name on the clipboard after you're finished. We do have 2 chairs and 2 microphones so that we can cycle through folks fairly efficiently so that we don't have to take a lot of time in transition. So if somebody is speaking, feel free to come up and have a seat at the open microphone and be prepared to begin your remarks when that person is finished. And if you want to queue up beyond that, certainly one of the open seats in the front row could be available for that purpose as well. We certainly want to be respectful of people's time and make this as efficient of a process as possible. You don't have to move or adjust the microphones. The folks in the control room will adjust the volume up or down depending on how soft or loud of a speaker you might be, so don't concern yourselves with that. Once again, address questions or comments to the council. We will, as questions come up, we'll attempt to address those as a follow-up item once all of the comments and questions have been completed through the testimony. And then with that, I think that's everything. I think I covered it pretty well the first time around as well. So with that, we'll open it up for public comment on either of these 2 pathway segments and welcome folks up to the microphones to speak.
Familiar faces. Hi, I'm Dave Booms. My wife and I live at 300 South McCarran's Boulevard. Mr. Mayor, council members, city staff, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm specifically speaking toward access, and I believe the news I just heard from the Parks Director is wonderful from my perspective. That was not in any mixes in the past, so I'm really happy to hear it. And as I presume that it's as part of an application process, that this is memorialized then. This is not based on a verbal agreement. This is a written process that members could go through. That is correct?
We'll follow up for sure on that.
Thank you, thank you. Again, I just want to thank that this access is being granted. I wanted to talk specifically also to potential blocks that way and an extension of dirt road that goes up from that section that was formerly referred to as a part of Wagner Street. Is used by utilities, and it was once used by an ambulance to get me out from my house. I'm sure if any of you driven past 300, it sits on the top of that ridge line, and somebody once biked up to visit us there, and I appreciate that. But our family's concern was specifically to access. That for us is literally the only way we can get, the best way, not the only way, the best way to get appliances, lumber. Understood we're not coming up for groceries or my parents or anything like that anymore, but we do have boats, and I'm happy to hear that this will be an opportunity to continue to do so. As far as potential blockages, again, I just refer back to, again, the fact that utilities do use it. An ambulance once used it. I hope there's not going to be a case where something like that's put in that would prevent the power company or the cable company to get up that road if there's a tree down, lightning strike, or the case. And And I hope we first use that road to move into this house. And whenever that day comes that we may choose to leave this residence, I'd happily look forward to the opportunity to be able to use a moving van again to move out. I think just as a comment, I've been hearing wonderful things tonight as a member of a church community and a lover of La Tapatia, so keep it up. But thank you one and all. And again, I just strongly would, my family were speaking strictly to access. That is the most important thing to us, and to make sure that is maintained. Thank you and good night.
Thank you for your comments. Hello and welcome.
Hi, my name is Joe Lynn. I live at 318 McCarran's Boulevard South. My husband and I have lived there for 28 years now, and I share Dave's concerns that I just want to make sure that there's access available. Because of the topography there, it's a steep hill and there are trees and things, so that's the only way to get to the back of some people's property. So if you want to store a boat or something behind your house, that's the only way. There are no alternatives. And as Dave mentioned, there are utility poles there. So I just want to make sure that there is a clear process available so that people can request access when they need to move their camper or their boats. I wanted to clarify on the document request for council action on page 2, it talks about additionally staff would install bollards or other deterrents to prevent cars from utilizing the trail. I wasn't clear reading that whether that's a reference to the Wagner section or the Tamarack section. So I hope we can clarify that there will not be bollards at Tamarack Street.
We'll make sure and clarify that.
And, yeah, people, it has been used for accessing houses since the 1940s. So people bought houses with the understanding that they would have that access. They've relied on that access. So I just want to make sure, I mean, I was very glad to hear that there will be a process for people to request access when they need to move their boat in or out, or just any sort of rare occurrences like that will meet our needs. So thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you. Hello and welcome.
Hello, my name's Jay Rollinger, and I live at 403 Wagner Street. First, I would comment on Tamarack. I do support paving the pathway. I retired about 3 years ago, and I like to walk back and forth through there down the park. I have a little dog that I walk. I've had several times where I've been walking on that narrow dirt path and vehicles have come along. And then it's like, okay, who's going to move here and who's going to move there? And not that any confrontations ever happened or anything, but I don't like having to climb up into a bunch of weeds so that a car can pass through there. I think this permitting thing makes sense, but how do I know if I'm walking back there and there's a car going through there, how do I know they've been given permission to do that? Are they gonna have some sort of a sticker or something that they're gonna show me and say, well, I have permission to go through here right now? So that was kind of a question about that. As far as the Wagner part, I found this document just going through yesterday, all the meeting agenda, and Mr. Freihammer mentioned it, but it's your attachment 7, so you guys should have this. And the weird thing about this was done in 2006, and this document was provided to Ann Elias and George Cartwright, who are my neighbors. And we were the original ones that asked for the vacation of the north 30 feet. But for some reason, my wife and I never received this. And so I was kind of surprised when I found this on the materials on the agenda. And this clearly does say that the pathway easement is the south 10 feet. Why my wife and I were never included in this, I do not know. Because they had to sign this and it's notarized, so I'm assuming it's a legal document, and your attorney would know about that. Our other concern with the pathway was, we've lived there 30 years, and we've had cars drive through there periodically the whole 30 years we've lived there. And with a pathway of 8 feet, we are just kind of afraid that opens up more of an invitation to people to drive through there. So we are all for, well, at the first meeting with Jennifer, we were told it could be a 6-foot path or an 8-foot path. And all 4 homeowners who are adjacent to it all said they'd prefer a 6-foot path. But the city Public Works Department said, no, it has to be an 8-foot path because we're going to drive a pickup through there in the winter with a big blade in the front. So again, I don't understand why we can't have a 6-foot path, but I guess that's up to you guys. The other thing is I knew that this pathway could be coming. I originally had some discussions with Mark Culver. And again, and I'm fine if you put this pathway through here. But, you know, again, our concern a little bit is safety and privacy of our home, because our front yard totally faces that path.
I'm going to note that you're about 40 seconds past your time limit, so if we can wrap up within 1 sentence, and then I'm going to ask a request of you at the end.
Okay, well, the other thing I want to quick mention is Mark Culver told me on that property I have liability issues if there's something there. And I also talked to you, Mayor Rowe, about that, and you told me the same thing. Why would I have to have liability issues on your easement? I don't get it. Now, obviously, I have homeowners insurance. I'm not negligent. I don't leave trash laying out there. So if somebody gets hurt out there, I don't see where I have any liability connected to your pathway. So, I mean, I'd kind of like to hear why that was told to me.
We'll definitely follow up on that. So my request then is also if you can, even though I said don't touch the microphone, if you can push the mic about a foot further away from you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it's not because of you, it's because of other speakers, but even a little bit further. We're just noticing some, you know, the T's and P's and things are just kind of popping.
Okay.
So not your fault, but so
Well,
appreciate your comments. And once again, we are well over the time.
This whole
so.
process is very emotional to me. It makes me very nervous, and I would appreciate you guys understanding that. I mean, again, I realize something's coming, but I'd like some consideration that I'm the homeowner that lives there. I have taken care of that land for 30 years. Nobody's ever paid me to do it, but I've done it, et cetera, et cetera. And now I find out that for some reason I wasn't even included in this deal in 2006. So who's dropping the ball on some of that?
So we'll definitely follow up with you on that. So appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this item this evening?
I got my phone. I have my notes on the phone, so I apologize if it looks like I'm not paying attention.
That's all right.
Being a digital citizen, right? Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you fine. Yeah.
All right, Amos Ridenauer. You don't have to try to figure out how to spell it. I'll write it down for you. I own 1801 Western Avenue. Owned it for probably almost 20 years, I think. So I'm discussing the Wagner Parkway pathway in blue. So despite their efforts, we haven't gotten enough knowledge to distinguish an 8-foot path from a street. I'm on the other side as the previous person, and it literally looks like you'll be able to turn. Despite signs, despite bollards, people have been driving through there for 30 years. We add a path specifically so you can bring a vehicle through it at 8 feet. There's going to be other vehicles other than the city vehicles going through it. I can guarantee you that. That's right on the edge of 3 people's driveways, including people with children. It only takes one bad citizen and one event to make this a terrible for both the owners and their children. We have not gotten sufficient information that they are going to take that safety in mind, despite repeated asking. So that's one item. Another item, no streetlights anywhere. So at night, when people want to use that path and cars are coming way too fast down the cul-de-sacs on both sides, there's not streetlights. People cannot see anything. It will be too late before they see something. My wife and I drove from both sides, going around the turn at 30 miles an hour and coming into our neighbor's house at, not into the house, but in their driveway at 30 miles an hour. You don't have time, even at 30 miles an hour. And people who are going through there go a lot faster than 30 miles an hour. So a sign and a bollard, not going to be enough, folks. You're standing on the precipice of a terrible accident, somebody going through someone's home, someone hurting someone's child. The 3 driveways that converge, that's a unique thing. We have not gotten sufficient evidence that the city understands what they're asking of those 3 property owners. 3 driveways, 3 sets of people pulling in and out of their own driveways for 30 years. And now you want to change that. So you're going to encourage foot traffic in people's driveways. How would you feel if I told you people are going to walk through your driveways when you're trying to pull out and go to work, or when you're on ice, or when there's rain and you can't see? That is dangerous. 3 sets of driveways that you're going to encourage. They already have to navigate around each other. Now you want them to navigate around foot traffic and dogs and bikes. Electric bikes that can go up to 30 miles an hour. I think that's extremely poorly thought out. And those driveways have been there forever, much longer than any of this other stuff. So finally, I don't think you should consider anything on the Wagner part until you have Tamarack done and studied and understood. Because the whole point of having the Wagner stuff was so that people can get to the Tamarack part. We don't know how many people are going to go on the Tamarack part. We don't know how important it's going to be. Yeah, there's some parks back there, but there's a wonderful walking path all around the lake. So if this is really where you want to spend $50,000, I didn't know the price. $50,000, I think it's not money well spent. My suggestion, grow that area, stop any traffic at all from going there, and do not allow all of us to have to be dealing with people's trash, dealing with people's traffic, dealing with people's bikes, dealing with people's dog leftovers, which I do when I mow.
All right, you're about 40 seconds over your time.
All right,
limit.
I'm done. That's all I had. Thank you.
Don't forget to write down your name.
I will.
All right. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak on this?
Hi,
Hello and welcome.
I'm Ann Elias, and I'm at 1823 Western. So the path, or I guess it's the path, will be going right in front of our house. Now, I have actually a number of issues. First of all, with the existence of that path, if it were to go through, Tamarack would have to go through. They're dependent on each other. There'd be no need for a path without Tamarack's path being approved. Now, I was told that this is, part of the need for this was because they needed it to be handicap accessible. So if you were coming from Reservoir Woods at the end of Wagner, where there is a path with stairs coming down to the cul-de-sac, that would mean that a handicapped person would need to come from that park, those paths, all the way down Wagner with no sidewalk. They're going down the middle of the street, I guess. You know, I have a handicapped niece, and I know the kind of equipment it takes to navigate the world. I think that's dangerous. I also think that liability is a big concern. Also, the width of it is of concern, and also in front of our house, there are wires. I guess it could be Comcast, it could be something else. I know they're not electrical, but I can reach them. If there's a path there, any 12-year-old or 15-year-old could reach those wires. And why wouldn't they? It looks like fun, you know, it looks like something they could mess around with. So we have asked many, many times over the years for those wires to be raised, and we've gotten no response, no response. The other issue is we have, both on Wagner and on Tamarack, there are wetlands in front of that property. There are wetlands along that trail, or along that alley. That's going to be a pretty big job, just trying to deal with that. I don't know if it's a good, oh, well, also, the park near the Tamarack Trail, it goes up a steep hill, difficult to navigate if you're in a wheelchair. It also goes across grass that leads to the jungle gyms or whatever. And below the jungle gyms are a lot of wood chips to break someone's fall. Well, a kid in a wheelchair isn't able to access that anyway. Or, you know, is that really access? And there are a number of parks. There's the park on the Rice Street, the beachfront there. That's a nice park. We have another one. Well, there's at least 3 that I know of that are already in the neighborhood. Let's see. And then it's concrete versus green space. I mean, why do we have to have more pavement? You know, I've been working on that piece of property. There's a lot of native grasses in there. It runs off to the wetlands in front of us, and it's just like, why? Why do we need this street access? You know, come down Wagner, get on your little path that's easy to use, then go across the cul-de-sac, and then go up the alley, go up the hill. Now think of a handicapped person
Ms. Elias,
navigating
actually,
this.
you're also at 40 seconds past your
Okay,
time.
anyway,
if you could
so
wrap up
I
in one
object.
sentence.
I think this is getting pushed on us. And revise the master plan. I mean, why can't you?
All right, thank you. Hello and welcome.
Hello, I am Ray Elias Cartwright. I am Annie's son. And I just wanted to quickly mention for the Tamarack pathway, it seems that an important aspect for everyone that is involved or affected by that is access. And I would just really encourage that if you're going to have access be an approval process, to be really clear about what is an approved use for that access, because it seems like some people are thinking that maybe it's great because they can bring a moving truck through or move their boat. And I think I would really encourage that you have dedicated language that and ensures that that is an approved use of requested access, and not just like kind of important maintenance. But if people want to use it for, you know, again, like a boat or a moving truck, make sure that there's verbiage that covers that. And then moving on to the I guess, Wagner Western connection, I think everything that we've heard here today is people that are concerned about it, people that don't feel that it's been well thought out enough, or that there's enough measures of safety that make everyone that would be affected by this comfortable. I don't know if I've heard anyone that seems extremely excited about it, or that it's something that they want or that would be useful to the people that are in the community that would have this affect their lives. So I think I would just really think about how, if there's so much pushback and no one's really advocating for this, why are we doing it? So, I mean, just if we're going to spend money, taxpayers' money on something, I think we should be really, really certain that it's something that everyone wants and something that will be helpful to the community before we do it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this item this evening? Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public comment then and proceed to council considerations. We do have a number of questions that were asked, and so we'll attempt to address those. And I think I'll start, this is a technical one, I think, for staff. In terms of the western end of the Wagner proposed connection, where there are the driveways, sort of shared driveway space right now, is there an engineering solution being envisioned that somehow provides functionality for the driveways as well as somehow defining access to what is a pathway and not, and what is not a pathway in that area. I mean, because certainly there's a big, especially on the two shared driveways, there's a big patch of pavement, and there's, not even necessarily distinguishing as to which driveway is which or anything like that. So just want to understand how that's being looked at from a staff or an engineering perspective.
Yep, Mayor, Council. We've looked at that a lot. It's very unique. It's not an ideal situation of how the houses are aligned to the road, et cetera, because they both face in what would be a road had it been built on the right-of-way, or right-of-way that was vacated. So we have a couple ways to take the pathway, trying to make it perpendicular to how cars would go in and out of the driveways. And we tried to come up with a solution too that would bisect the driveways and separate those two. So I'm just not certain that that option would create a driveway for one of the properties that they could actually maneuver in and out of their garage. So we have to work through some of those details. We've talked through rocks and wooden bollards and planters and movable things on the edge of the trail. At the last meeting, we talked about installing a plastic bollard that can be removed during the winter with reflective on it as well. So I think there's kind of an existing issue that the concern is might be aggravated by a trail. So it sounds like there are cars that have periodically driven down there. So regardless of paving a trail or not, that's still something that we're going to look to address with additional signage and potentially some reflectors or something. But there are also things I think they could do on their property with planting if there's something. And I think Rollingers have mentioned in previous conversations with them that they used to have rocks at the end of their parking bay. So I think there's tools in the toolkit that we can propose and try. And as Jesse has mentioned in other conversations too, that like we can try something, we can be reactive and try to adjust issues as they become more defined as well. Did that kind of answer your question?
Right, so it's sort of a to be determined at this point.
Yes.
Is that fair to say? All right. So is it conceivably one of the options is just to sort of commence the pathway at the eastern end of the parking bay?
We would take it all the way to the driveway regardless to have like an ADA ped ramp with the truncated
All the way
domes.
to the curb of the street, you mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Okay,
of the
okay.
curb of the cul-de-sac.
Okay, all right. Right, thank you for helping understand that. So then back to the questions, probably another one that's an important one to understand is in terms of the liability question, and I'm going to defer to our attorney here in relation to, I imagine that people, like, so on my property, I have city road right-of-way in the first, whatever it is, 15 feet or so of my property. If somebody injures themselves or whatever as a result of my negligence in that space, that's my responsibility as the homeowner. If the city put some sort of city facility in there that is accessible to the public and somebody injured themselves in the use of that city facility in the right-of-way, is that my responsibility or the city's responsibility at that point? Say a sidewalk.
Yeah, Mayor Rowe, you have it right. If in the maintenance of the path, or if a homeowner were to place an obstruction in the path that, in a negligent manner, that caused harm, they would be responsible for those actions. But they're not going to be responsible for just the fact that there's a path there. Shouldn't increase their liability at all unless they actually do something that would cause the path to be unpassable or something like that.
And so an example might be if the city had not yet gotten through with our pathway clearing equipment, and there was a lot of snow and ice or something like that, and somebody injured themselves on the pathway attempting to use it at that point, that's not the homeowner's liability at that point.
That's right.
Okay. Hopefully that helps clarify that to a certain degree, and certainly we can ask other follow-up questions to help with that. So let me just get back. In terms, and Mr. Johnson may want to be ready for this, so the question in relation to the process and how sort of written out that process is and policy, understanding that there may be cases that come up that also nobody anticipated that may make sense to grant access. So I can conceive where we don't want to have a policy that's so restrictive that people couldn't conceivably be able to have access at perhaps the discretion of staff if it made sense. But also, do we want to have something in place that that at least puts some general parameters in place to help people understand it? Is it a written thing? Is it something that's going to be provided or mailed to all of the property owners affected? Or how is that process going to go? And then just to one of the other questions, are we going to perhaps have people put a big bright orange piece of paper in their window that says that they've got a permit from the city to use the pathway or something like that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great questions. Given
And they're not mine, they're the
correct, but I proverbial great questions. I think that in general, given the interest in additional access on this proposed pathway versus what we've had elsewhere, it would make sense to clearly outline the parameters with obviously an opportunity to potentially expand upon that in a one-off situation. I do have certainly concern about tonight's comment being misconstrued to, oh great, I can bring in and out whatever I want to anytime, because that certainly is not what I'm trying to say. And regarding how we've handled it in the past, it generally is a letter that is sent on official city letterhead that in modern times they have on their phone, and if somebody says, can you show me your permit, and this has happened, and they pull it up, they've got their letter from me, and they can actually, the resident that's concerned can actually call me. I don't envision this to be so frequent that we are regularly seeing cars back there, and I want to be very clear about that. I envision this to be the exception and not the rule. Again, potentially the one-off, once a year, once a season type thing. That would be the hope. And if we are seeing continued frequent vehicle traffic, I don't want to speak for Jesse and Jennifer here, but we would attempt to mitigate that through use of bollards or other mechanisms. We don't want this to just continue to be open usage if we are advertising it and paving it as a pedestrian pathway.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Councilmember Strawn.
Are you speaking in regard to both pathways at this point? Are you only considering residential access to one or the other of the two pathways?
From my chair, I can't envision a reason we would offer access to Wagner. It seems like there's just plenty of access through the traditional means there. It's specifically the Tamarack leg where we've heard these concerns.
Thank you.
And just to follow up there too, I'm forgetting, but I think there's a fairly limited number of properties that actually require the access, and I can't remember exactly what the number is, but perhaps staff can update us on that.
Yeah, so access to Tamarack is very limited. We did vacate back in 2017 the north-south leg, so technically there's only, I think, one legal access. Now, technically someone could get access through one of their neighbors' properties, but there's really only one, other than the property owner that has direct access out to Western, I think there's only one other legal access off the Wagner alley, if you want to call it an alley.
So we're certainly not talking about...
It's not talking a lot of neighbors, but I do believe traditionally there's been 4 or 5 properties that potentially have used that in the past.
Okay.
But with the vacation in 2017, legally it's restricted it further.
Okay, appreciate that. Following up on other questions, I apologize, getting off track there. So I know there was talk about potentially removable type of obstructions or bollards or whatever on the Wagner portion. Right now, as it's envisioned, there isn't necessarily anything envisioned for the same purpose on the Tamarack connection unless you see that there's an issue over time. Is that correct?
Correct. I don't think we would plan to do that as part of the initial project. That's typical of most projects. We don't do it. We usually react after. That's what we did at Marion. We didn't build it. We signed it. It'll be signed no matter what. But if it does become a problem, most likely we would do it with a planter or a rock bollard, similar to what we've done on other projects.
All right, thank you for clarifying that. All right. As to the width on the Wagner portion, have we got a final conclusion on that? I know we do have narrower sidewalks that are cleared by sidewalk cleaning equipment as opposed to trucks. Is there still the possibility of looking at a narrower connection on the Wagner connection rather than the 8-foot?
So there is, and I would say in light of what we've learned tonight from the Rollingers, when we confirm the actual easement width, that might have to become more of an option, because 8-foot pathway and a 10-foot easement gets a little tight. Staff traditionally wants to put bituminous pathways. They're cheaper, they easier to maintain. We can plow it with any piece of equipment, not just a sidewalk machine. It melts snow better, it's easier to patch. There's just a lot of reasons to do it. It's more people are accustomed if you want to bike. Some people think you can't bike on a sidewalk, although we don't really specifically have that rule because it's not an urban environment. But we can, and that may be the option what we end up with, which certainly will, 6-foot concrete will help theoretically visually look like it's less. But I will say if people are driving through and it's not paved right now, they're doing it because they don't follow the rules. So if we pave it, I don't think what we pave it's gonna necessarily do that. But that's where signing it and pulling bollards up is the best way to address that.
And just to be clear on the asphalt, it sounds like what you're saying is you can't pave an asphalt narrower than 8 foot. Based on the
Correct, we
equipment
can't,
that's used to
correct.
do that.
Yep, with it, we can't build we could, it would be very low quality. We would not want to do that.
Gotcha, okay. That's what I wanted to understand from a technical perspective, okay. Question on the driveway isolation, we've kind of got into that. I think regarding utility wires, regardless of whether a pathway connection is put in there, certainly that's something that we can connect with the utility folks, whose ever wires they are, to try to address those. And there were a couple of things about the liability. I think we've addressed those. So I think we've hit all the questions that were asked. But if there's anything else on the utilities.
Didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope, that's all right.
Following our first meeting, we did call utilities. They did go out there and raise things. Some of the lines, there's a long stretch between poles. So I am connecting with staff again to see who went out, what utilities went out there. So we'll continue to look at that, but it has been attempted at least once.
All right, and continue to follow up then, okay. All right, with that, are there any follow-up questions from council members for staff, since we've got them at the table here to help us understand as we consider this? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, I just wanted to ask the attorney, I saw in the packet that there was a number of legal concerns. Are you feeling as comfortable as an attorney can be that we've addressed all of that?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, I've reviewed all of the legal documents in the file and some of the property document that came through today, and I don't have any concerns.
Thank you.
And just on the one that came through today, I know that individual indicated they wouldn't be able to be here, but it was a conveyance of forfeited lands from the state of Minnesota to the at the time, the village of Roseville in 1966. And the sender had referenced that specifically it says that if that particular property, and this is the Tamarack portion, is not used for, I believe it's the Tamarack portion, if that property is not used for street purposes, it reverts to the party of the first part on this document, which is actually the state of Minnesota. And so it would not, as was asserted by, I don't believe, as asserted by the particular person who contacted us, revert to the properties at that point, per this document. And certainly, if there's any subsequent legal transactions that have happened or real estate transactions that further establish the city's ability to use that, then it sounds like that document may or may not even be relevant. Ms. Tierney, am I correct in that?
You are correct, and not to get too far into the weeds here with you, but there's also a state law because it was a conveyance of a tax forfeited parcel to a municipality. After 30 years, the reverter and the limiting.
The use limitation.
The use limitation, thank you, go away.
Okay, and since 66, it has been at least 30 years.
It has.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for staff or our attorney from the council? And I would just note, too, that we are being asked to look at these by staff sort of as two actions. I think the idea being is that, as was even mentioned by one of the speakers, if we don't look at going ahead with the Tamarack connection, certainly the Wagner connection would be kind of a moot point at that point. And perhaps some alternative action may be more appropriate given that. But so I believe we're being asked first to consider action on the Tamarack project, and then subsequent action on the Wagner. So just so council is kind of aware of that order of things and how we might want to take a look at that. Any motion from the council or further discussion or clarifying questions? Councilmember Strawn.
I just wanted to make a clarifying point that we have a long list of connections with the community. We've had a lot of contact, and while things are a bit, have changed a bit, this is not a new topic. We've discussed this many times here as a council. Very few, if any of us, were here for a document in the early 2000s, and sorry if you didn't get what you needed, but most of us weren't at this table at the time, but hopefully we can have proper notification moving forward. But as far as this was added to the master plan for the past several years ago, and so I don't want us to go backwards too much and rehashing something that's been determined. I would motion as the city to move forward with the finalize the plans on Tamarack Pathway and advertise for bids.
I'd second that.
All right. Motion is on Tamarack to authorize staff to finalize the plans and advertise for bids. It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Strawn, actually, just to suspend for a moment, I did want to just double check something that came up in the discussion. So on the comment from Mr. Rollinger about not having received that document, I'm imagining if the easement vacation and associated documents are on file with the county, that's the important piece of it, obviously, because that means the city has, in fact, vacated the easement and it has reverted back to the property, or vacated the right-of-way and has reverted back to the property subject to that easement, and that should be documented. If the Rollingers need any copies of anything, they should be able to get that, I imagine, from the county?
Correct. We'll certainly, to follow up, we will redo that research to clarify the 10-foot and make sure it is on both parcels, but I'm very confident we have two separate documents. We probably only included the one.
Okay. Thank you for
But
clarifying.
we'll certainly follow up with both property owners on that.
I appreciate that. All right, a comment on the motion. Councilmember Strawn is the maker of the motion.
Nothing further.
Okay, Councilmember Schroeder is the seconder.
I would also like to repeat what Councilmember Strawn had said about there's been a lot of work behind this, and it's been looked at a lot. I would also add that getting the final on this and the bids, there's still some time there in case something comes up when that's being done, that it's not, this isn't absolutely done at that time. Is that correct? We would still have to bid on, or we
Well,
still have to
certainly we'd have to
approve?
receive the bids
And then approve it.
either approve the project at
Right.
that point, award a bid, or reject the
Right.
bids if they're not acceptable to the city. There's a number of approval steps further.
Right, and that's my point, is there's still, once we get some more information on this through the final, and then the bidding, that we'll have one more look at it before it's final, so.
Other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Wright? Councilmember Brown?
Thank you for all your work on this, and thank you to the people who spoke tonight. I appreciate the information. I have been involved in this for a while, as you have, and we have had some of these discussions before. I appreciate the effort to allow some access for the people that would need that, and I think that's a good compromise. I think we've come a long ways on that, so it makes me feel comfortable supporting this. Thanks.
Right. Any additional discussion? Councilmember Ratton?
I just want to tag on to that thought. I hear the concerns from some folks about how that access will work, and I think that's really good that we continue to think very thoughtfully about this and how we communicate with folks in the area about that. One idea that came out before, for example, on boats in and out, is there a weekend day, a Saturday, we give a 4-hour window, we actually close off the road or the pathway, and so making it clear and safe for everyone. Thinking about things like that rather than taking in and out 5 separate boats 5 separate times. So looking for ways to reduce the potential for car-human or car-bike interactions as we think about how we uniquely use this. Certainly there are other properties even along this road that don't have access to their back of their property, and they figure out other ways to do this. So I know that in general things can get done, but we can look for that compromise position if at all possible. Thinking about the constellation plan that's found in the Park Rec Master Plan as well as the Pathway Master Plan. This kind of thing is absolutely something we have talked about now for I've been part of the discussion for about 15 years now as we were working on the Park and Rec Master Plan about connecting human beings to other resources and other opportunities. I know that the pathway connection at the far end of Wagner into Reservoir Woods was changed to make it accessible a year or two ago, and that is part of then these connections allow folks to do this. Folks can run through there, bike through there, see nature through there. That's part of making an interconnected web of resource for our community to use. And we clearly are seeing with dirt paths that it's being used. The question is it accessible? Is it safe for everyone? And I think this is an important step in making that next piece, that safe and accessible piece for everyone.
Right, if there's no further discussion, once again, this is the motion to authorize staff to finalize the plans and advertise for bids on the Tamarack pathway portion. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Then, council, as to the Wagner portion.
Motion to approve staff to finalize plans for the Wagner pathway and advertise for bids.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Ratten to authorize staff to finalize plans for the Wagner portion and advertise for bids on that. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Strawn as maker of the motion.
I think these all tie into, and we've noted they're very interrelated, and as Councilmember Schroeder mentioned, we will continue to amend as we need to make sure that this is making sure it's either 6 foot or 8 foot, and but it's always hard if you don't live in a neighborhood and you see a path. Is that a place that I can be in this way? It helps people who happen to be back there, and I actually have gotten lost back there myself. So it does help to know that that is an intentional pathway for walking and finding a way that we can make it work the best possible.
Councilmember Ratten is the seconder of the motion.
Nothing further right now, thank you.
All right. Other discussion on the motion related to approving the staff to go out for finalizing plans and advertising for bids on the Wagner portion? I think the thing I will add is certainly we take to heart the comments of the immediately adjacent neighbors and the challenges of that site. And as Councilmember Schroeder mentioned, I think it is conceivable that as plans come back, if we simply can't solve all of the challenges that are before us, we may have to take another look at this, but I think it's worth doing the engineering and doing the step of trying to figure it out and making it work, because, as was noted by other council members, the connection, to the west to Reservoir Woods, and then obviously to the east with Tamarack Trail to the Tamarack Park, it really does help connect people together, and I think that's one of the things that the Constellation Plan as well as our Pathway Master Plan both talk about, as well as our overall comprehensive plan for the city, which we update every 10 years, and I think it's been consistent over the last several updates that we want to make sure we're enhancing connectivity in those pedestrian/biking type connections. But we do want to acknowledge that there are definitely unique situations to this particular stretch, and those will have to be worked out, and I think we're going to all have to work through that process and come up with what hopefully can work the best, and we'll see if that does ultimately happen. And once again, once plans are finalized and bids are received, if we find that it's just not working, whether that's a staff recognition or a council recognition or a combination, we will certainly take that into account as we get to that point in the process. But right now, I think it does make sense to proceed with this next step. So unless there's any further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to authorize staff to finalize the plans and advertise for bids for the Wagner pathway connection signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes unanimously. And thank you again to everyone, both on the staff and the residents in the neighborhoods, for working through all this and staying in contact with us through the process. I think we've got some things to do to make sure we keep things well communicated and well worked through, so we'll work at this end to keep up our end of that. With that, then, we will move to our next business item. This is item 7D, which is to consider potential changes to Rosefest, and essentially it's an update on planning for Rosefest and discussing possible alterations to some of the events. And we have our Parks and Rec Director, Matt Johnson, with us once again for this item. Welcome,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Again, wanted to come before you today and provide a brief update on some changes that are being considered currently for Rosefest, as we know that these are really significant and long-standing community events. So I originally had envisioned this as sort of just a talk through of the report, which was perhaps long-winded but thorough in your packet, that discussed sort of the direction that we're headed. As I worked through this over the weekend, I realized that some slides might help steer the conversation. So I will be brief, but I do want to just share the conversations that are ongoing with the staff level and some recommendations that staff are currently considering. So I won't go too long into reiterating what Rosefest is, but we're, as you're all surely aware, it's usually about a 10-day festival of all that's good in Roseville, a recreational festival that's anchored by these 4 large events: the Rosefest Parade, the Taste of Rosefest, which is hosted by Roseville Rotary, the Run for the Roses, which is currently a 5K, 10K, and kids fun run, and the July 4th Party in the Park and fireworks. This is a flyer that shows what we offered last year. Give or take, it's been pretty consistent, certainly throughout my whole time here in Roseville, and really goes back long, long before that, with those 4 anchor events being very consistent for many, many years. Unlike most other community events, community festivals in the area, Rosefest is unique in that it is largely run by the city. We have some partners in this. We have the Rotary that helps us with Taste of Rosefest. We have the parade committee that is facilitated through our staff, but does provide a lot of volunteer effort into managing the parade. But the bulk of the festival is run through the city. We rely very, very heavily on multiple city departments in the putting on of Rosefest, and most specifically our public safety areas. Historically, public safety has been provided by our police reserves, and police reserves, for putting us all on the same page, are simply volunteers in uniform that are in uniform to support sworn officers. As you go back as many as 15 years ago, that was a strong force, often 20 to 25 officers of a bunch of different ages. Some were in it to gain law enforcement experience, some to serve the community. What we've seen is, as the years have gone by, and with changes in law enforcement and people, the way people essentially, their volunteerism, we've seen the number of police reserves really, really dwindle. This is not new to the last 2 or 3 years. This goes back 7, 8 years, but it's really intensified as things around law enforcement has changed. This has really put us in a difficult situation, and I'll click to my next slide here, where we rely very heavily on police reserves to manage traffic, to be a uniform presence at these larger events, even though they're not physically the one typically enforcing laws and policies. Simply having uniform officers adds a sense of calm. At our Run for the Roses, historically managed as many as 10 of those larger intersections. We don't want just a volunteer over on 2 county roads trying to stop traffic. That needs to be a police reserve. And as we've gotten through, I'd say, the last 3 or 4 Rosefests, we've really come to a point where we're about to offer these events, and Chief Scheider and myself and Chief Brosnahan, we're all kind of going, oh geez, we got to find people. And we've always been able to pull it together through an amount of sworn officers who have worked overtime, and specifically we'll highlight last year's July 4th event, where we had officers that were working a 12-hour standard shift, and then were asked to work 4 or 6 hours of overtime to stay for July 4th, meaning a 16 or 18-hour day they were putting in to try to do that. And it's become increasingly difficult with our police force numbers to rely on that to provide safety. Concurrently, we've had these sort of other things that have started to happen. One, which we're all very privy to, is unfortunately a lot of very scary and sometimes deadly incidents have happened at these large community events. 2 that were very shaking to our staff and to our community members who are at our events. If you'll recall, a couple of years ago, there was a car that was driven into a parade in central Wisconsin. We utilized that to really step up even further our mitigation on our parade, using large public works vehicles to block access to as many streets as possible. But that's still always in our mind as we continue to offer our parade and all our larger events. Additionally, 2 years ago, we had a shooting occur at a July 4th event in Chicago. And obviously, the examples of these scary things happening are plentiful throughout the United States, and has really changed the way both the staff and the public view an expectation of safety at these large community gatherings. I think it's no longer accepted that you can just have people come together and trust that things are going to be okay. There's an expectation of some sort of perimeter and an acceptable amount of law enforcement presence. Additionally, as it relates to the July 4th, we have this third factor that has continued to occur, which is that cities around us have stopped, for the reasons just outlined, offering July 4th fireworks. Most specifically, St. Paul and Minneapolis have not offered them the last several years. Other smaller communities, such as Maple Grove, Champlin, have also stopped offering fireworks on the 4th of July. Given our convenient and wonderful location in Great Park System, when people are looking for July 4th fireworks, we're finding more and more they are finding Roseville. And what this has led to is a situation where we have less law enforcement there than we've had previously, and more people outside Roseville at the July 4th event. So as staff, we've continued to deal with these confluence of events that have continued to happen, and we've been able to get through. And we plan to continue to with most of these large events. We believe that we've suggested some very strategic alterations that can allow us to continue these beloved events, but in a way that hopefully can make them more Roseville-centric and safer. The biggest one, and this is not a small alteration, but is one that I think is very important, is considering, rather than having the fireworks and the party in the park on July 4th, moving it to the Saturday before, June 29th, and would make it a Rosefest, the conclusion of Rosefest, sort of party in the park and fireworks, and that would make it more similar to, say, Slice of Shoreview or Stockyard Days in New Brighton, Village Fest, where in our mind you're going to get the community that's going to come out to that. You're not going to have folks from other communities come to Roseville to watch our fireworks. It'll be Roseville based. Additionally, by not holding it on July 4th, our hope is we'll be better able to recruit officers, to recruit reserves who are still hopefully will be in town, and even Parks and Recreation staff. It'll be easier able to get them there to have that event, so we can preserve this beloved event, which is the party in the park and the fireworks, but do it in a way that can be safe and potentially more advantageous for our resources. Additionally, the other event that I talked about that has continually stretched us is the 10K run as part of our traditional run for the Roses. Obviously, 10K spans much of Roseville. I think there's 46 intersections that 10K crosses, many of which do need to be managed. They all need to be managed by either a volunteer or a police reserve. We've altered the routes as much as we can to get them off the streets and onto park trails, and that's been pretty successful. That next step would potentially be really focusing on our 5K run and our kids run, and reluctantly stepping back from the 10K run, recognizing that spreads too much, spreads our law enforcement too thin as we do those activities. So I hesitated to even put this in there, but I wanted, because we're talking in the abstraction, what a potential Rosefest lineup could look like as we're proposing. And I hesitated to put it in there because it is very much a sketch. But as we talk about it, we could have a parade on the 24th, Taste of Rosefest on the 27th, and then we could kind of have a super all Rosefest fun day where you could begin the day with the run and end the day with the party in the park and the fireworks, really buttoning it up into a tight-knit package where people can really experience all the best of what Rosefest has to offer. I want to zoom out for just a little bit longer because I want to make sure that I don't create the impression that we are just responding and basing our decisions only on what has occurred in the past. As a staff, recognizing that now really was the time where we're at a tipping point where we need to determine what Rosefest is and these bigger traditional events, if we're looking at altering them, we thought that we needed to really look at what is Rosefest and how do we determine what fits and what doesn't fit. And as we look at developing new events and potentially letting some older events go, what defines it? And so based on some informal, definitely not a thorough engagement process, but informal conversations with the community, a SWOT assessment within our staff, we sort of came to these top priorities, and they're enumerated more in the RCA that I wrote, but really speaks to making sure that this is a community festival that speaks to our diverse demographics, our sustainability priorities, but ultimately quality over quantity and safe events. So with that, these are pretty significant and important changes. We have not had conversations with our partners about them or anything at that point because we thought before we got too far down that track, we needed to gauge council's comfort level and really make sure that that we receive your feedback before we get too far down the track. So That is my best effort at abridgedness. And we're specifically seeking feedback on the 2 specific events and then general feedback on the approach.
Great, thank you, appreciate that, Mr. Johnson. Questions or feedback from council members on the suggested changes? Councilmember Sterling.
Mr. Johnson, can you tell us what the average length of city festival is in your experience?
Yeah, we did some research on this, and it really does run the gamut. We're the longest one that we've encountered significantly. I think that things like Stockyard Days and St. Anthony Village Fest are typically a 3-day, 4-day type of thing. Maple Groves, I think, runs closer to a full week, but that's the longest one that we encountered as we looked into this.
And ours could conceivably be like 12 days or 14 days from the parade until 4th of July?
The way it lays out, yes. And some of that, there's usually a couple of sort of dead days in there where, we wrap up and wait till July 4th. But definitely we do 10 or 11, 12 days of action for sure.
Wondering about the participation of the Juneteenth celebration in the last couple of years,
Yeah.
Being just a week prior to the proposed parade, how, if at all, that's been considered for participation in this?
It has been, and I think it's something that would make some sense as we look at potentially making sure that Roseville involves community partners as much as not just being city-driven, but also the city had a high involvement in that. So Kathy Ramont and I have spoken, but not about it being in Rosefest. The dates could make sense, but again, that was something that I thought this conversation was important before we got too deep into that. But that certainly is a reasonable consideration and could make sense.
And then I have another question about, do you think there would be a change in monetary support from our partners, community partners, if we were to not offer fireworks on the 4th of July, but to have it on a separate day?
I don't. Typically, our financial support from our partners has been in the form of sponsorship for Rosefest as a whole. I think that we could actually potentially improve our partnership involvement by, they struggle to get people to participate on the 4th. Monetarily, I think if we really up our promotion of this as a tight, buttoned up, really exciting thing we're doing, I think we could actually up our level of support from the greater community rather than it being adversely impacted.
I have 2 other comments. One of which is, of course, ongoing, I've shared before, I'd love to see more participation of Roseville music groups. It's always frustrating when Roseville High School doesn't have a marching band, that there is no musical participation on the part of the music, or even if we have several high schools in Roseville, or that serve Roseville. That maybe we could include some folks who are in the north part of Roseville also, but also just thinking about maybe there's a way to include, because that always brings a more positive influence of people coming to the parade, if you can include families and such like that. And then I think just anecdotally, for me personally, I have not attended the July 4th for the last few years for some of the same reasons. It's just gotten out of hand, and the individual fireworks and stuff like that, it just feels like there's not a good handle on the crowd, and it just hasn't felt worth it to me. So I think it's worth having this conversation. I think thank you for bringing it forward.
Other thoughts or questions from council members? Councilmember Graff.
Thank you for the conversation. I really appreciate you thinking this through with your departments and bringing this information to us. Change isn't always easy, but I think the suggestions you are making could improve the event considerably. And obviously, we need to look at safety first. I mean, having 15,000 people come with minimal resources to handle that is not a good idea, in my opinion. So I think those were the main things. I thought all of your suggestions made sense to me as far as the run. They're really well thought out. So I'm not going to go into every specific, but I thought it was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Johnson, for presenting this. I do like what you've suggested. I think safety, as Council Member Groff said, has to be number one. So I appreciate you talking about that and working with the police chief on this issue. And I like the idea of condensing it, and that I think you're going to get a lot more participation from people if you do move it off the 4th, for sure. I know I'd be more available, because it's one of those things where you're trying to do, all these different events at once, so. And when it comes to the run, the 10 run, that seems really labor intensive. And so I think the spirit is still there with the 5 and the kids run, so I think that we still have it. And I also like the idea that you're looking at combining, I'm looking at this list from last year, and it's overwhelming to see all the things that are presented here. So it's kind of nice if you can bunch them together, because that was going to be one of my questions tonight, is what about all this other stuff? So I do like the idea of condensing it down, because I think even a week, you're going to fatigue staff I mean, they have their day job to do anyways, and then they have to deal with something for a week or longer. That's asking a lot of staff, and so I very much support what you're presenting here. So thank you.
Councilmember Haddon?
My turn. All right. I agree with the comments that have been made. I think this is an intelligent thing to do. You've clearly thought it through, worked with staff, as we always ask for things to be outside of silos, and made discussions around the resources and the ways that we can support each other in providing things for our community. I run the 5K every year. I don't need to run 10K, so I'm fine with you cutting it out. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think making that kids' fun run, if there are ways to do some extra something there, that's great. I don't think they need a lot. My kids ran that for many years, and so I think big picture, you're doing the right things here, and I support your work.
And I would concur with pretty much everything that's been said. I believe the registrations for the 10K have not been huge to begin with, and probably have dwindled a little bit even over the years. I know 5Ks tend to be more the distance that more sort of recreational runners do, speaking as myself also in that regard. So I think that's sensible, and I didn't even realize that the roll wasn't even a part of it anymore, so that maybe tells you how long it's been since I did it. But the changes with the party in the park and the fireworks, I think makes sense to pull that off the 4th of July. I think after a week of all this intense activity, it might be nice for staff to actually have the 4th of July off as a benefit to having accomplished the Rosefest celebration. So that's got an additional benefit maybe of moving off of that time frame. And I appreciated the slide previous to this where you've sort of looked at, taken that step back and looked at it in a bigger picture as to what Rosefest is, what it really means to the community, and what it can be, because I think that means that you're thinking about opportunities too, things that now we're maybe making some shifts to some of the big events, but maybe there's some things that haven't been as big of a part of it or at all a part of it that can maybe come in, or as you're saying, take the place of something else too. So I think that sort of overall perspective is good, and I think as the Parks and Rec Department always does, keeping that good community involvement in the decision making too is important. So I appreciate everything you brought forward, and I think it was a sensible step to check in with the council too, because you might have had 3 to 5 people up here saying, "Oh, what are you doing? This is the worst thing I've ever heard of." And it would be good to know that before you got too far down the road. So it makes definite sense from that perspective. Councilmember Strong.
And you will hear that from many people who think it's the worst thing you've ever done, no matter why the reasoning is. But I really think it's good to, I think the St. Anthony party is one day. So, I think when we look at our people around us, a lot of them are one weekend. And so I think this is a great start. And if we decide, that still needs to be tweaked and maybe we move it, I think I appreciate your being willing to potentially take the heat on it in an effort to make it work better and to utilize resources. The fact is we have to be safe, and if I don't feel safe going, and I'm at as many events as anybody, there's a lot of people who are more wary, who are like, I don't really want to do that. So I appreciate your big picture look.
And it's also not just maybe a feeling of not being safe, but also just I think the last few times that I've gone, just the sheer crowd size and traffic issues and parking issues and all of that, just makes it to be a less pleasant experience to participate in. So I think, that's a piece of it certainly as well. So I think that makes sense. Mr. Trudgeon?
And certainly, if there's more comments, I don't want to jump in the middle of it, but based on the conversation tonight and the feedback, is it appropriate for us to take it to the next step and start communicating to our partners, to the community, work out the logistics, and start working in this direction as outlined by Mr. Johnson? Seeing head nods?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's the view. There's no objection from the council to doing it.
Wonderful.
Thanks again for that check-in, appreciate it. And our next item is Park and Rec related as well, so back to Mr. Johnson for this item.
Yeah, busy night for me tonight. We're item 2 of 3. This is another one where, I debated whether to begin with just an email, but it seemed a good one to make sure that, number one, I could talk to you all face-to-face and explain my thinking on this, but also secondarily to receive feedback that you have and make sure that we're all on the same page before we get too far down the tracks. So this is a conversation about Rosebrook Park, and I know you're all familiar with Rosebrook Park, but I wouldn't be doing my diligence if I didn't show what Councilmember Etten referenced earlier, which are Parks and Recreation Constellation map. Rosebrook Park is over here on Snelling and County Road C. It's best known as the soccer fields that you can see from C and Snelling, but can be accessed from Fry Street. Rosebrook Park is the lone park over in Constellation I, which is immediately a little jarring, except for when you realize that the bulk of Constellation I is commercial. And it is outlined as a community park, meaning that it serves more than just the neighborhood because it has specific amenities that are community-wide. When we look at Rosebrook Park, some of those specific amenities include 2 full-size lighted soccer fields, our only full-size lighted soccer fields in the Parks and Recreation system. We have one of our 6 park buildings. We have a nice mid-sized playground and the Rosebrook pool. We also have tennis courts here in Rosebrook Park as we look at it. We have a couple of amenities that are coming up on our capital improvement program. And when those amenities come up, even when it's just one, we always try to take a step back and say, does it make sense to replace this one-to-one, to put it in the same spot, or is a little bit more planning necessary on this one? These two seem to align in a way that made a ton of sense, especially given some of the conversation that was related to the development down here at the Press Gym site and parking issues that came up in the community. And so that really caused us as staff to step back and say, wait a minute, are we thinking this through? What makes sense in the long run? So the first of the 2 planned amenities I'm going to talk about tonight is our playground. And as we know, all of our playgrounds in the city are a part of our capital improvement asset management program. Typically, the useful life on a playground is about 20 years. The Rosebrook playground was put in 2000. It is one of the older ones in our system. And I always joke with these playgrounds that sometimes we're our own worst enemy because people walk up to it and they say, wait a minute, you're replacing this? It looks so great, because we work really hard to keep them clean and looking good. But what happens over time is that the sun breaks down the plastics, the metal starts to break down as well. You can see here we have 2 different shades here on the slides, and that's because the ends of the slides physically broke off a couple of years ago. They do not make parts for it any longer. So we actually had to acquire different slide ends and weld them to make them work. So there's a lot of hard work from our staff to kind of keep it going. You also see this old curb here, not up to our new standard, which is a clean concrete curb. And you can again see paint fading. This is probably the playground in our system that I currently hear the most feedback on, hey, when's that coming up? This has actually been designated for replacement since 2021, and we've had either priorities rise above it due to their condition or simply staff capacity haven't been able to get to this. We're now at a point where theoretically this would be next year, but we have this other capital improvement item coming up in 2025, and this one's a doozy. You're all familiar with the Rosebrook wading pool, I assume. This is our only water play feature in Roseville. It's another classic, and it is, I would say, beloved by those in the neighborhood. And when you look at this picture, it looks beautiful. It's a fantastic facility. I know that when my kids were very young, we were at this pool all the time. It was great. However, when the water drains, you see the seedy underbelly of the Rosebrook pool, which includes cracking through the water recirculation system. So there's a video that I couldn't get to load, but where the water actually, instead of pumping through this jet, actually comes in through the wall. We have cracks on the ground that leak water out over time, and our filtration system is still original. And I know that this pool has been there since 1970, but literally today I was looking for something completely separate, and I found an invoice to Frank Rogg from 1972 to do a repair on this filtration system. So we know that filtration system has been there for a long time. We're at a point where we've done a couple of SOS emergency type repairs on this. We had a filtration system when we were go down right as we were about to get our permit last year. Our very handy maintenance crew went on eBay and was able to identify some old replacement parts to keep the filtration system working. I want to be very, very clear that pool safety is very important, so it is safe. We would not open it if it wasn't. The filtration system's fully functional, but it is very MacGyvered together. And I think as a Roseville person, I can say MacGyver. So, so we look at that pool, that's about time to, this is time to be replaced. When we start to look at the pool, the obvious thing to think about is another wading pool? Does another wading pool make sense, or is this the time to look at a splash pad? I would say from a Parks and Recreation perspective, beside general support of parks and open spaces, the single greatest thing we've heard of in Envision Roseville for a specific asset that our community wants is a splash pad. In the 2010 Parks and Recreation System Master Plan, there were very loose concept plans drawn for each site, and I will say these weren't fully vetted out with the neighborhoods, but they exist. A splash pad was talked about at Rosebrook at that time. Splash pads have a number of benefits over pools. Number one is they're accessible. You can take a wheelchair or other walking mechanism into a splash pad in a way that you just can't into a wading pool. Additionally, although the wading pool is only a foot deep, there is always a drowning risk anytime you have standing water. It is surrounded by a fence, a locking fence, but there would be nothing stopping somebody from getting in there after hours and something bad happening. So for all those reasons, splash pads seem to make a fair amount of sense. But obviously, that's a conversation that needs to be had with that neighborhood before we get too far down the tracks. So with that, you get to, okay, we're talking 2 of the 3 amenities. The other piece that we've continued to hear about Rosebrook Park is concerns about parking. And I suspect as soon as we talk about putting Roseville's first splash pad into Rosebrook Park, what we're going to hear from the neighborhood is, that's great, but now you're going to bring more people to this park, and where the heck are they going to park? So we thought about it a little further, and what we came to is Rosebrook still has the infrastructure for an outdoor water facility. It has outdoor changing rooms. It's the only place in our park system that does. It has this great pathway connecting you through. So we didn't have to think too hard, and as you can see, I'm not a spatial architect, but we can move the playground back here to what is an existing green space when that comes in. We can put a splash pad in where the playground currently is. Make sure those elements work together. They're themed together. They feel like they're one and the same. You can run from the playground to the splash pad and back and forth and vice versa. And then what you could do is, knowing that we have a new development coming in here, where the pool currently is could become additional parking. We've done some preliminary assessment of the site with our public works staff, and we believe at minimum we can get 30 new spaces into that location, which is certainly not insignificant. The tree removals would be minimal. I believe there would be 1 tree lost as we look at it. We still would need to vet that out a little bit more. But it seems like it could certainly check a lot of these boxes. This is where we get to where we were in our last item, where I want to be clear, we haven't met with the neighborhood yet, because I didn't want you all to find out we're meeting with the neighborhood about this before I came and talked to you. So with that, we look at our next steps. The next step really would get out and talk to the neighborhood. As we look at our engagement protocol here that we use as a city, we would view this as a collaborative effort with the neighborhood. If we go out there and universally they say, Matt, this is terrible, what are you thinking? We'd probably go back to the drawing board. It's not our goal to force anything on anyone. So we would want to heavily involve them. Our engagement process would likely go beyond just that neighborhood, recognizing that in the Parks and Recreation System Master Plan, this is a community asset. This isn't just a neighborhood park. If we're talking about a splash pad, it would be the first one in Roseville. We want some wider engagement. So whether that would be a meeting in the Rosebrook neighborhood and then a survey to the wider community or something like that, we're still working through that, but that would be our intention. The thought would be to connect with the neighborhood on just this big goofy idea I've shown to you, kind of get their blessing on, yes, this seems like it would make some sense. And at that point, we would potentially issue an RFP for a playground water toy vendor that can come together and do it all, and probably an additional vendor for the playground. And then at that point, the nitty-gritty planning starts to come in of, would it be a recirculation system? Would it be a system that can be used with the irrigation system? What sorts of amenities would it have and all that sort of thing. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I do want to showcase the budget and be transparent about that. As I mentioned, both the playground and the pool are identified in the next 2 years' capital improvement program. We believe those numbers to be sound and that we could accomplish the project within those with very strong amenities. The one piece that isn't currently funded would be the parking lot piece. However, we have acquired some park dedication dollars in that neighborhood, both with the Press Gym site and the development that was north of Snelling, where the Smash Park, that area there. And so those funds could potentially be utilized for the parking expansion. And again, would give us sort of a blank slate as we look to how we do this. If we wanted to do something that was a little bigger and a little bit more involved than what these dollars would allocate, that would potentially be an additional funding source. So again, with that, just to summarize the process, next step would be to engage with the neighborhood, finalize the site plan, develop an RFP, potentially select a vendor, and then we get into the specifics with a hope, the way I would see this, of being this installed in 2025 on schedule with that pool replacement. With that, would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, questions from the council for staff? How soon can you get a splash pad built? No. Councilmember Schroeder.
Not so much question, but as in, I appreciate how much thought you put into this, and I have to say, all the events that I went to this summer, that whole splash pad kept coming up, people talked about it, and so I do really support that idea. I think that would be a great idea, and of course, I really like it also that you thought about financing this whole thing and how that's going to be paid for. So I appreciate that side of it as well. And I think it's a great idea, your approach. First, you've looked at some of these concepts, and then you want to talk to the neighborhoods. And I do like the approach, and I think it is something I could really support. So thank you.
Other thoughts or questions? Councilmember Etten.
I would agree with all those comments. Splash pads have been coming up since the park master plan. So people are ready for that. I know that people also love that little wading pool, but there are a lot of reasons why that probably isn't the best choice going forward. So I think this is smart. I appreciate that you are taking a step back and looking at how it all fits together in a bigger picture. I would anticipate, after hearing concerns about parking for many years there, that they will be very appreciative of you thinking about that piece. So good work.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions? Councilmember Groff.
I like all the ideas, but to me, it's really going to be what the neighborhood and the community says in the end, because they're the ones who really live next to it and use it all the time. But I think you thought this out well, and I'd be surprised if you don't have positive feedback from them.
Councilmember Strawn.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for answering my questions earlier today about this. I know I asked at that time if it was possible for us to consider some type of ecological, and you mentioned that potentially we could use the water as to water the soccer fields, and so I think people would be very inclined, especially people with concerns about our impact on the environment, that we have thought through some of these things and tried to not just do the job, but do it in a way that really fits our greater vision as a city. So I appreciate that. One thing I just think on initially on the parking, which is a great idea, because it's really hard to park in that area. My friends live right on the corner of Fry, and it's really hard to get into their driveway sometimes. Is that we do have that new housing development going in, and so making sure that that is not an ancillary parking facility for the housing there. So just kind of finding a way to delineate that so it is for the pool users and, or just the park users. And I know we've had it mentioned to us before that there was concern about having some type of safety phone or something there because of the potential for, drowning and other things like that. So I do appreciate that. And even just the young lady who was injured in the pool drain a few years ago, it does remove so many of these challenges. So I think it probably, our insurance provider would probably appreciate that too.
And I will echo everything that's been said. I think, and I appreciate Councilmember Strawn mentioning sort of the sustainability aspect of it and the potential, you had mentioned reuse potentially or recirculation. I think given that, as was noted in the report, splash pads tend to consume a little more water than a pool, a static pool, I think that's an important thought to include. And it provides a great educational opportunity for the users as well. That's a great tie in there, so I appreciate that. And I would say, and just to that end, from a funding point of view, if that sort of gets outside of budget, there's potentially resources from like the watershed districts and things like that they might be willing to support those types of projects, as we've done before in some of our other park facilities like Villa Park and Evergreen with those systems. The other thing I just wanted to note too is if there are other aspects that come up in the process, because there are always things that come up as you engage with neighbors, whether that be something to do with the practice board at the tennis court, which I brought up after last year's neighborhood block party in that neighborhood, but then also thinking about signage and communication with soccer field users about where to park and some of those things, or any amenities associated with improving or enhancing the experience of the soccer field users too. I don't want to say we should just open it up to every single possibility, but at the same time, there's sort of that, well, you might as well aspect to some of these types of projects, and we want to control that as best we can, but we don't want to eliminate those possibilities, especially if we've got some of that park dedication funding to look at. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. But generally speaking, I think it makes sense, and I think the outlined next steps, unless there's any objection, the council would like to see those as the next steps that we undertake.
Thank you.
Hearing no objection, I think that's the way we want to go. All right. And I should point out for members of the public who may be watching at home, the reason I'm not calling for public comment here is that I think everybody in the chambers is city staff right now. So, while they're perfectly welcome to come up and speak to these items, I shouldn't restrict that. That's why I haven't been calling them.
Got a lot of hands raised in the back.
Yes. So that brings us then to another park item, which is to take a look at approving the concept plan and budget for the new park on County Road B in Western Roseville. And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Johnson for this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council again. This is a really, really exciting one for my chair, and this has been a project that's been a long time in the making. Again, Councilmember Etten spoke to the 2010 Parks and Recreation System Master Plan. As we go back to the System Master Plan, and I'm going to jump around slides a little bit, one of the largest priorities that was identified in that System Master Plan was getting some parkland over here in Constellation J. And it's been challenging for a number of reasons to do that. And while this maybe isn't the full amount of parkland that we're not saying we're done there, it moves us in that direction. So the parcel, as a refresher, that I'm talking about today is a parcel that was part of the Midland Legacy development over here on County Road B and just to the east of Eustis. If you'll recall, this was a parcel that was acquired partially through park dedication and partially through purchase. And I really want to give kudos to our community development staff who really sort of helped us steer it in that direction and saw this as an opportunity to get a little bit more than just the half-acre park dedication and kind of got that ball rolling in that direction. But what we ended up with is 0.8 of an acre of parkland. It's a small parcel. It's about the size of two parks that we currently have, the Midland Gardens Park and Unity Park, our two newest parks, but also in a fully built-out community. This is the sort of park design we're going to be doing largely moving forward. But it is really, really important. As again, I mentioned over here in Constellation J, we don't currently have any city parkland in that space. And we have some pretty significant barriers there that would prevent folks from there to get over here into Constellation J, namely Cleveland. And then, of course, we have Highway 36 up there. This is a really neat tool that you'll be seeing more of from me as I continue to talk about the development of our Parks and Recreation system. The Trust for Public Land has this fully interactive database, and what they've established is for walkability to parks and access to all the amazing benefits that park provide you is a half mile without a significant barrier. And so they publish this full database, and they do it of every metropolitan area in the city, that identifies areas that are accessible to parkland and areas that currently aren't. Roseville, as it sits right now, is about 92.5% accessible to or walkable to parks. That's extremely high, and that's something we should be proud of. The national average is about 70%, and the Twin Cities metropolitan area average is in the mid-80s, is my recollection. And obviously, parks are pretty important in this whole area, so we should feel good about being in the top of that. But I think as a community, we want to strive to do better. As you look at this whole purple area here, this is the area that will be served by this new park. There will be access to this entire area by having a new park there. So with that, we began our engagement process with the community, recognizing there were going to be a lot of asks. This was going to be the one park in that area. And we wanted to do a process that really focused on that neighborhood. We intentionally did not cast the wide net and have folks from the east side of the city come over and talk about what they wanted here, because we just knew we didn't have enough space for that in that specific parcel. However, that was not in any way intended to imply this was a park just for that neighborhood. This is a park for everyone. We again, as we bring up our little rubric here of the public participation rubric, we identified our engagement level as collaborate, meaning we were going to collaboratively design this. We went into this without any preconceived notions of what we were going to do, a true blank canvas. And we held 3 meetings. The first one was brainstorming with the blank canvas. Second one was a couple of disparate concepts to try to kind of hone down what they really wanted. And the third one, we presented a general final concept. We also, recognizing some of the historical issues with getting multifamily participation in these sorts of engagement activities, we did do a survey, and then we did send an additional mailing to the multifamily housing nearby, asking them to participate in the survey. And we did leave some flyers there as well in hopes that we would get more participation, and we did, I think, out of that, got 1 additional. It wasn't a huge amount, but hey, that's the work you got to put in to try to get it. So, so I'm going to share with you a little bit of sort of what we talked about in these meetings, and then finally the final concept plan. So the parcel here is located, it's got, as I mentioned, some spatial issues. It's longer than it is wide, about 230 by 150. And the first thing that we recognize is we have existing residences here, and we have a new yet resident being built here on the west side of it. So we knew we needed to leave some sort of space for at least a buffer of some sort to make sure that we aren't in these folks' backyard. Additionally, there's a pretty significant elevation change back here in the northwest corner. And so that left us with about a 100 by 200 foot space to program. Again, I mentioned that we started with a blank canvas when we met with the neighborhood, but we wanted that to be a blank canvas with parameters. So this is one of the many boards that we showed in that first community meeting, and it really tried scale pieces to show you, if you want to have a large playground, that's going to take up half your footprint. And try to get people to start to think about that, and really so that we, again, didn't try to put 200 pounds in a 50-pound bag as we move forward with this. So we had boards like that, boards like this, that were really designed to just get people thinking, what do you want for a park in your neighborhood? In the upper right, you have this whole board, you have some of the results. We asked them to put Post-its on the board to talk about what they made you think. I like that idea, I don't like that idea. Put blue dots on what are your favorite things. And I think we had all told 6 of these kind of boards that have different amenities, all with different concepts. We also gave them a questionnaire that even allowed them to draw in what their concept for the park would be. This is one that we got back. And then throughout this all, we had additional conversations with the folks as they were going around looking at the boards about what might make sense, what might not make sense. That was the blank canvas meeting. It was a really productive meeting. I think we were able to begin the meeting with some conversations on why this is important for the neighborhood and sort of get people in alignment. And from that initial conversation to the third part, I think we did get a lot of buy-in from the neighborhood and a lot of belief that we were headed in the right direction. As I mentioned, the second meeting, we came back with two very disparate concepts with the idea to elicit strong reaction and try to get from folks what it is they really want. And then in the third meeting, combine all the feedback from all those previous meetings to get to our final concept. Without walking you through too much through the nitty-gritty, what I'm here to present is actually the final concept for the park, which is the fun part. The first thing I'll talk about is parking. We have a small parcel, as I mentioned, and we were not inclined to utilize any of that green space for parking. We knew that that was obviously just something that we didn't have to give up. But we do know that we have the County Road B project coming through there, so we worked with our Public Works Department, and they're going to be doing a bump out here that will allow us 4 or 5 spots right there, which is already more parking than we have at Midland Gardens Park or Unity Park, which are other small parks of a similar nature. I would say the one piece that we heard very, very consistently from just about everybody that attended the meeting was a desire for significant play structure. The community's closest park is Midland Gardens Park, and Midland Gardens Park was designed intentionally to be a predominantly passive park with lots of natural areas, pollinator gardens, beautiful, peaceful space. And what they said is, we have kids in this neighborhood. They want to climb stuff. They want to make noise. We need to do that. And so what we've programmed in here is for a mid-sized playground. This is a playground that traditionally would go into a larger park. It's about the size of the playground we just did at Kea Park, where you've got a mid-size, similar to what we're talking about even at Rosebrook. So it's going to take up close to half of the footprint of the park, but it would give them a very big, valuable play experience. What that actual play set will be in terms of, what color is the slide and will it be ropes or jungle gym, that'll continue to be refined as we work through this process. But we know we want a big playground here. Another piece that we heard is they wanted a spot to gather, to talk to their neighbors, to connect. And we know that's one of the valuable things that parks offer. But they did not want a big formal picnic structure because they didn't want to take up too much space with it. But additionally, they were concerned about it overwhelming the park, that you'd have folks coming in for large family gatherings and that sort of thing, and again, recognizing that small footprint. So one of the neighbors actually had recommended this idea that came from the Shoreview Commons Park, which is rather than just doing, a picnic structure, what about some plantings with some sort of Adirondack chairs and just kind of places to lounge around? And so that's this picnic grove that we have. Rather than planned shade that would be a huge shade structure, right now the plan looks to have fully planted trees that will grow in, provide shade, and then sort of lounging chairs. Another neat resident idea that we don't have anywhere in our park system that we're going to try to do here is a chess table. So like you see in New York City. We're going to give it a try and see what happens. But I think it's a fun idea, again, to have this sort of less programmed space and just a fun kind of gathering space. The other thing that we heard and is very consistent with our values is wanting to make sure that we preserve some natural space. Again, a small parcel, I don't want to oversell this natural space. We've got about the entire perimeter, which amounts to about half of it, would be reserved for replanted trees, native grasses, and really native spaces, but recognizing that we still need space to program. We have this, which I think ends up being about a 350 or 400 foot little loop to walk back, see the natural spaces, and just kind of, again, stretch your legs here within the park. And then this right now is talked about as native grasses along the perimeter and potentially some more maintainable native species in the middle, so you could still throw a football in there or kick a soccer ball, but that's still sort of being worked through. The big source of division, I would say, throughout the conversation is to basketball or not to basketball. It was a consistent conversation piece, and if you look closely in the packet, and I'd be happy to send you the boards, we saw a number of comments that were very explicit. The only thing we want in this neighborhood is basketball, and a number of other comments that said the only thing we can't have in this is basketball. And so we always try to avoid using just a straw poll. That's not really the correct way to get to a good outcome. But I will say, when you weight them, we did hear more pro-basketball than anti-basketball. But more excitedly, what we really came to is what we thought was a really exciting design compromise. And what this is a multi-hoop basketball space, really a shooting space, where you don't have a rectangular or square court. You have sort of this curved court, and you have a couple of different size hoops. and I won't commit to any sized hoops, but I did hear the feedback issued earlier. And with the idea being that it can serve as a place where you could play horse, you could have multiple family members of different generations shooting baskets, kind of shooting around. A parent and a child can go toss a ball up there, but you're probably not going to get a 5-on-5 game come out here, be out there all day long. We do think it's fair. Some of the residents that were nearby did have that concern of this is a small parcel. I'm going to hear that basketball dribbling. And we do have intentions to plant some sort of mitigation species here on each side to try to mitigate that, but they're close. They will hear some of that. And so we thought that this was a really good compromise to make sure that we're offering that to the people in the community who said, right now kids are playing in the street. That's flat out what we heard, is we have neighbors that pull their basketball hoop out and they're playing in the street. Give us a basketball court. So this is a good opportunity where 4 kids want to go out and play 2-on-2. They absolutely can do that, but it's not going to be so disruptive to the neighborhood if that's the way we envision the design. Additionally, a couple other small but not insignificant things that I think reflect our values and our standards. Programming in bike parking is going to be important, making sure that we've really thought that through, that's accessible. You see here, and I think Director Freyhammer will talk about this as well, making sure that the park is accessible through the new path on County Road B, making sure that we're thoughtful about those connections and can get people into the park. And then the other piece, as we get to the nitty-gritty of the playground, we've really managed to develop really strong relationships with folks that I met through the inclusive playground process at Central Park. And they've been involved in every playground design I've been involved in here, providing feedback to make sure that although it may not be an fully accessibly designed playground, that we're thinking through accessibility and access in that design process, and we'll plan to have them involved in that as well. So with that, again, that is sort of the extent of the project. The project budget outlines here, again, this is park dedication dollars, that really this is the intent of park dedication. It's through development, we've lost the opportunity to purchase some of these parcels. We really want to make sure that we're putting in the best park we can, and that really reflects the needs of that community. We anticipate the budget to be about $570,000. The bulk of that is going to be a combination of the playground and the site work involved to move the dirt and make it all go. I did talk about it in my request for council action. Without necessarily knowing the details of the plan, we can't commit to exactly how they will be used, but as always, we will intend to utilize volunteers in either planting or playground build or both, however we can. We want to engage the neighborhood in the construction of this park. In terms of the capital improvement program impacts, it would be about $22,000 that would be added annually to essentially account for the eventual replacement of the playground and the basketball shooting court and those sorts of amenities. And we would anticipate about a $7,500, excuse me, there's an extra zero in my slide there. I scared you guys. $7,500 annual maintenance, and that really accounts for the things like staff to pick up trash, to mow the site, additional day-to-day, fixing the slides when the end breaks off, things like that. So with that, that is what I'm asking for the council today is first authorize the concept plan as has been outlined, authorize the project budget and the funding source as the Park Dedication Fund, and then the next step is to actually authorize LHB, who has been our consultant through this process, to begin to create the construction documents. Through the remainder of the process, I want to be conscious of not over-engaging with the community. I will say that we went from having about 40 people at our first meeting to about 30 in the second to about 20 in the third, but we do want to find a way to touch base with the neighborhood one more time into what that playground will be and what those tangibles will look like. We will do that, but we still anticipate having this completed in 2024. So with that, I will open the floor for any questions and go from there.
All right, thank you again for your presentation on this and the process to get to this point. Questions from the council for staff on the proposed plan and budget? Councilman Bratton.
I appreciate your process here. Again, you're checking off a lot of good boxes today, so thank you for that work. Thinking about that open space on the north side of the potential basketball space there. One of the things that is very much part of the Park and Rec master plan is to have open space for open play. And is that space fairly level? I know we talk about this just to the north of that, it's very unlevel, but is that space fairly level?
It is fairly level, and I would say there was a robust conversation about exactly what you're asking about at our last meeting about this, and I don't think we reached a full resolution, which is there was a certain subset of the group that said, we want long native grasses that look like a prairie, and there's others that said exactly what you are, which is we'd like to be able to kick around a soccer ball. So we were looking for a way to kind of compromise on that, potentially native species that can be maintained is sort of where we landed. And in answer to your question, it is fairly level.
Yeah, I guess I would encourage that happens because it allows for different types of play.
Sure.
Versus grasses that are 10, 12 inches or 3 feet, whatever they are, it depends. And I understand the push-pull on this. I understand the historic interest in the area that was generally undeveloped completely. But if the goal is say, hey, we want to have this to be a park that can be used for lots of different ways, having a maintained open space there, so mowed open space, I think is really important thing to consider. Although some of the lots just to the east of this are fairly flat, there are actually a lot of topographical challenges for many of the lots in this area to having an open space for kids to kick around, or like park near me, family was playing a t-ball game, right? And you can't do that if that's tall grasses, right? So it's just thinking about how people can use that space if it is flat and maintained.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Schroeder.
Once again, Mr. Johnson, you did a nice job with this. I really appreciate how engaged you got the neighborhood, numerous meetings and taking all their, reading through this packet, it looked like people felt like they were heard. And not that they're going to get everything, but at least they got to express it. So I really appreciate the process in this. I also, you mentioned bringing in the accessibility for people with disabilities. And we obviously, everything can't be accessible, but that's even just being part of the consideration. I really appreciate that as well. And then you did the long-term view on this, not just what it costs to develop this park, but what it is going to cost the city moving forward with the CIP, and that's a good piece for us to understand as well. So I appreciate you thinking this through from the very beginning, the concept, all the way through maintaining it. So nice job, thank you, and I support it.
All right. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Graff, I guess we're going down the road.
Okay. Not so many questions, just I did go to 2 of the 3 meetings, and I thought it was really well done. I thought your staff and you did a really good job of responding to questions, even though some of them get a little heated sometimes, and there was some, especially on the basketball issue, and I thought you addressed that very well. I think having the different heights perhaps would be, I've heard other people bring that up, that they were very pleased with that compromise. Of course, the people right close are concerned about sound, but that's true of tennis courts and pickleball courts also. So it's part of having a park nearby. It's an amenity, but it's also has some things that if you wanted to sit and quietly read a book in your backyard, you just have to be prepared for that sometimes. So I think the process was really good, and I think the final plan that you've come up with addresses buffering for the neighbors. They were concerned about that, and maybe some berming. I don't know if that's still in there or not, but so I'm pleased with it, and thanks for all the hard work.
Okay, I'll go next. I reached out with my questions, so I mostly have those answered, but I do appreciate where we've come from when I started and we were talking with the folks about this area and how acrimonious and unhappy the folks were about this. And I think this really provides one of the best possible plans for that area. And thank you for reminding people that it is a public amenity that is potentially usable by the whole city. It's hard when it's in a neighborhood that is kind of shut off. But I just think in those 5 spots, I know you've been great about this in the past, and I'm sure this will be a consideration that maybe one of those 5 spots will be a handicap spot or somewhere nearby so that there's an opportunity if someone is able to access that. So maybe all 5 spots would have the access from the road or something. So if you had a stroller or something, or no matter where you were getting on to that sidewalk, you would have an opportunity to jump right on there. But and then maybe understanding what a backup would be. Obviously, when parks are new, you know, what happens next then if those 5 spots are taken? Where is the next path or desirable place? Maybe signing the roads adjacent to having one side of parking only, or, you know, just being prepared to know what would happen if that's the case, so that the neighbors feel like they're not being overwhelmed. And usually these things die down, but the enthusiasm will be strong for a while to see what the new place is. But I love the ideas. Thank you.
And I think, I'm trying to remember the plan for County Road B's reconstruction, but I think there is a plan for some parking just in general on County Road B, so without being an expert on that, that hopefully will help provide some of that overflow. So one of the things I appreciated too was, you know, along with the compromise related to that open space at the north end of the park, is the mention of trying to look at some sort of native species that might be able to be maintained as a shorter, you know, turf for, you know, general use. I think that's a great, maybe, you know, laboratory for the rest of the park system too, because to the extent we can, you know, provide, you know, reliable turf that people can use, but also that we don't have to do as much intense maintenance of, or uses as much, you know, or is dependent as much on rainfall and or sprinkling, you know, and all those things, I think that can be beneficial. So, you know, definitely if that's something that ends up being a part of it, I would definitely be encouraging of that. So definitely want to make sure that that stays part of the focus in some fashion, but because of the fact that it can be potentially, you know, useful throughout our system. You know, just last weekend? I think it was last weekend, there was some folks at Central Park off of Victoria on the west side that were doing an event that looked really muddy. And, you know, so they were kind of chewing up the turf there, you know, with their event. And so I made that same facial expression as I was in the park and noticing that. So, but just thinking about, you know, if we can find the magic turf that you know, is, you know, works well with a lot of use, is low maintenance and doesn't require a lot of water, boy, would that be great. So if this is our chance to find something, or find out what doesn't work, you know, that's good to know. So we have a request before us to, by motion, adopt the plan as proposed along with the budget and authorize entering into the agreement with LHB to develop the construction documents for the project as outlined.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to do those things by motion. Discussion on the motion as the maker, Councilmember Etten.
I think we've said plenty.
All right,
Thanks
as
for
the
your work.
seconder.
I agree.
Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, and once again, nobody from the public is here to comment, and I think that may be either a testament to the dwindling size of the engagement or that people are generally pretty satisfied. But with that, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that plan is approved, and we look forward to that construction in 2024.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Mr. Johnson. Now take a break. Now we switch gears a little bit from Parks and Recreation back to consideration of our compensation, and classification and compensation for city employees. And I believe, Mr. Trudgeon, this is an item that you're bringing forward?
Yes, although I might want Mr. Johnson up here, he's on a roll right now. I think he spoke enough tonight. So, yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief and certainly be available for questions and feedback. So, as mentioned in the RCA, we've been working on the classification and compensation study throughout 2023. Most recently, on October 9th, the council received a final report with the recommendations for implementation and costs. And very, very generally speaking, would note that the comparison was for 2023 compensation scales. So as a result of that study, it was determined, generally speaking, that City of Roseville wages are about 8% below the market minimum and 10% below the market maximum. As part of the study, I would also note that There was the whole classification part of that, which looked at all the job descriptions. We did the job descriptions and recalibrated the point system and fed them into the proposed compensation system. So as a result of the new compensation system that's being proposed, as well as the market study, we are looking to implement this plan and looking for your approval tonight to begin that process. As outlined in the RCA, there are 3 steps really to get it as part of the implementation. One is to transition into the new proposed step and grade structure. We already have a step and grade structure, but this would be updated to reflect the market and the revised classifications. So the first step would be to place the employees at the step that is closest. It should back up. This is for non-union employees only. Union employees are covered by individual contracts, and those are separately negotiated. So what we're talking about throughout this whole study is the non-union employees. So the first one is to transition into proposed step and grade. This would place employees at the step that is closest to the current wage in the new system without a decrease in pay. And there's an estimated cost of about $213,000 for that. The next step would be then to take the new step and grade system and the wages as part of that, add the COLA, which is proposed to be 3%, the cost of living adjustment, to update the wage structure there, the wage tables. We would also want to take a look at long-term employees that without an adjustment may possibly be placed in the same step as brand new employees. So we do want to acknowledge their previous experience and the level that they were at. We looked at several options, and we are not proposing to replace like for like, meaning that if they're at a certain number step, that they automatically get that step. But we did want to do some adjustments based on experience, and under the system that we landed on, employees would be able to go up to a maximum of 3 steps if they had 15 years or more and graduated down on there. So there is a cost for the COLA and that adjustment of about $422,000. And then finally, just to make sure we get the total wage costs factored in here, we want to factor in the step increases that employees do get currently and moving forward based on satisfactory performance of their duties, and we wanted to factor that in so we could have the total cost, which is $121,000 roughly. So overall, the implementation of the class and compensation plan as presented is the same amount as you saw last time, $758,100. And would note, while these are all new costs in some respects, we would typically budget for COLA increases as well as step increases, so only a portion of that 758 is totally new cost, if you can follow what I'm saying. So there's always new costs, but some of this cost is just going to be kind of this one-time adjustment as we get into the new system. Also included in the packet is some benefit information. I would note that's attachment 3, and there was minor adjustments made to the document, and that was sent out on Friday. You should have a paper copy at your seat there, but also the online packet was updated as well. As noted previously, and really based on a lot of conversation today with several of you, it's difficult to compare directly. There's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of nuances to each very specific plan here. I would apologize too for the information as it's presented, because it's kind of hard to follow. Unfortunately, we did not get this until late in the game as a packet, so if we had maybe a little bit more time, we would have tried to make sure it was presented a little bit clearer. We can certainly answer any questions you may have on that. This is a data point that I think we can really use moving forward, because it's very true that part of compensation is benefits. Absolutely. We've been primarily focused on the wages and the positions, and this is something that does obviously impact the overall cost for employment, but it also is something that can be a benefit to the employees, whether to retain them or to attract them, so something that's very important. And we want to try to make sure we balance both of those. What I would say is, while we've been focused more on the wages and asking you to implement that tonight, there's opportunity as we move forward to keep looking at the benefit package. We are going to be at the end of our 2-year cycle with our current provider, that we can look at offering different plans and maybe looking at calibrating that side of the benefit package a little bit differently moving forward here. We have some thoughts and ideas. It's always a balance you have to play to make sure that, especially with health insurance, that you're not pricing it so much that it's really unaffordable for employees, but also cannot be unaffordable for the city budget and the taxpayers as well. So we constantly look at that. I think currently we've been doing a really good job the last couple of years. This year, we've only received a 5% increase, which is accounted for in the budget. Previous year, we received a 0% increase, and oftentimes you hear about double-digit increases. So we've been fortunate. We have a robust wellness program. We try to structure our plans. One of them very high deductible, so hopefully limit the amount of use of the insurance. Trying to balance that. Obviously, claims kind of change over time, so you really can't totally predict all that, but that's something that's all important. So I just would throw that out there. This is something we'll continue to look at. And just as a reminder, on September 11th, the City Council did weigh in and approve the package for 2024. So if we really want to make some changes, we have to probably look towards 2025 and beyond on there. So with that, I will pause and only mention that tonight we are looking for the council to adopt the updated classification system, which includes the grade and step structure, and authorize the implementation plan as outlined, which also includes the 3% COLA for 2024. The COLA for 2024 ultimately will not be decided until by the budget, but if that's something that we're headed towards, we want to start getting that in place. And the reason we're asking for approval tonight, it will take some time to get our system updated to reflect these new things and to communicate to employees. So we're running out of time here. It's mid-October, late October, and so only have 2 months plus. So we're looking to get this moving here so we are ready to go on January 1st. But with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions and receive any feedback.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trojan. I'm going to kick off the question. Just I wanted to clarify. So the total cost of implementation, as was outlined, is about $758,000. As I was doing the math very roughly in my head, the portion of that that sort of is a typical annual budgetary amount is somewhere around, say, 320, 330, 40, something like that. And then the balance is the sort of new costs to get people in the right places and all of that, if I understand correctly. And obviously the numbers, I'm just using fairly rough numbers, not to be super precise in case I'm a little off. But I mean, just generally speaking, in any given budget year, regardless of what we do for this specific classification and compensation implementation, we would have some costs for COLA. We would have some costs for step adjustments for people that are naturally progressing through their steps. And, you know, in the big picture of things, somewhere around 300-some thousand is about where that would be. And then the balance of that 758, more or less, is the cost of the implementation specific to this proposal.
Yes, that's correct. You described it correctly. I think that amount is about the same, or about what it was. I did have that from last presentation. I don't have it right handy right this second. But.
And then as far as the benefit side of it, what we're being asked to approve tonight is all on, really on the compensation side, not
wages.
being asked to change wages, not being asked to do anything with related to benefits this evening.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Questions from the council? Councilmember Strong.
How many employees does this impact? So I assume it's non-union employees, non-seasonal employees too, or what?
No, not seasonals. It's just the part-time and full-time non-union employees. So it's 100 and.
That was a very precise estimate from the back of the room there. But Ms. Olson is coming up to be on the spot.
Thank you, Council. Mayor, we have probably about 145 non-union, about that, maybe a little bit less.
I think it's a little bit less. We had a little bit over 200 employees, and with the police and fire and 49ers, that gets close to 100. So we'll follow up with exact numbers.
Okay. So just curious then on the COLA, is that COLA just for those 145 or so employees?
Yes, the number that you.
Because the COLA for the union employees is already figured into their union contracts.
Either their existing contract, which is a 3% COLA, or it's currently being negotiated right now. Yes.
In either case, you've got something in your budget.
In your budget for that, yes, yes. Yeah.
Other questions from the council? Councilmember Schroeder.
Actually, you know, thanks for all the information. I was hoping we would have gotten this information a bit earlier to be able to chew the numbers a little more. But I'm glad we did get a couple of weeks to go through it. And, we've had numerous conversations about benefits, and, I would have hoped that we could have done benefits and wages together, because a full package like that is usually what you consider for employees, and making sure that benefits and the wages are where they need to be, and then you put them together to figure out when you're offering someone a position that it's, so I would hope well, I'm glad to hear we are going to be looking at the benefits in a more detailed way. That's the upside to that. But I would hope that in the future that we could maybe work towards doing those together, so we could see a total cost and total changes that we may want to, because this is, to me, it's like only part of the equation. And I think it's important that we do stay up to date with the market to make sure we can attract good employees and retain them. So don't, that is something we definitely need to do. And again, that involves the benefits, because we want to make sure that that's where it needs to be as well. So, but yes, and there was a lot of pieces in here, and I know it was quite complicated, and so I appreciate getting that information. But a little earlier would have been nice.
Understood.
Any other questions from the council? Councilmember Strawn.
I had mentioned this to Mr. Trejan, just as someone who maybe doesn't have the richness of benefits of a public employee, just trying to be cognizant of saying that 127% of what a benefit is covered is really generous, and I do feel like, okay, maybe we're 8% below on something, but if that's 127%, I really want to make sure we're looking at that whole total compensation, and also kind of taking the eye to the average person that we have as our taxpayer, and make sure that we, are aware that how many of them are having that level of richness of benefit. And I know it's about retaining employees, but also it's about being good stewards of the tax money that we're entrusted with, so.
Councilmember Schroeder?
And just one more comment on that, too. I think it's important to, when you're trying to attract or retain employees, that the benefits is a really good thing, and you want to remind employees, hey, you get paid this, but look at this big amount of benefits you get. And so I think people forget about that, and then when you're trying to attract people, same thing is, well, here's our pay, but look at these great benefits too. So I think it's a positive thing that the city can use as part of their attraction for employees. So from that aspect, it could be a very positive thing.
Mr. Trejo?
If I could just follow up on Councilmember Strawn's comments, and certainly agree that we have to be very mindful of the benefits we give and what it appears in the public, and this is all public dollars. But I don't want anybody to have the impression that every employee is receiving 127% of the insurance premium. It's a small subset of single users that take a specific health plan. So it's a subset of people. That's just one example, and the report shows how other people fall in. So I just want to make sure it's not every single employee. Actually, it's very few that actually would receive that. And the data that we've received from Abdo was a little across the board as far as what was counted towards the premium. So you compare the averages, it gets a little muddy. So just want to have that caveat, but the point's well taken, and just being cognizant of how it impacts the taxpayers and what it can look like. I'm certainly well aware of that.
Right, Councilmember Groff.
And coming from a very different part of the economy where you don't get any benefits at all, this looks very impressive. But on the other hand, it is balanced out with the compensation. So that's I mean, people that complain about that, I have to remind them that yes, you are in that sort of a job, but you make X number more dollars to buy your own insurance. So that's part of it. They also are paid time off is something that's not found in that segment of the society. So those are things I would point out that are positives for people coming. Having said all of that, we are looking at this as comparables to other cities that have those things, and so that's what we have to look at as comparables. It's not the other types of employment.
We have a requested action to adopt the classification system, which includes the grade and step structure, as well as to authorize the implementation plan as outlined, which includes the 3% cost of living adjustment for 2024, understanding that potentially that could adjust through a budget process subsequent to this. Is that fair, Mr. Trudgeon? I think that's what you said. Is there a motion from the council in relation to this? It's on page 3 of 4.
I'll move adoption of the classification system and all the pieces that are coming with that.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Bratton, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember Bratton.
I think we are past due with this, and I do agree that we need to be thinking about our compensation, the benefits side of this, but for right now, we have this part before us, and I think we're past due. I think the data we found showed that we've been falling behind. I think this is an important step to ensure that we are caring for our employees.
Councilmember Groff is the seconder.
I would agree with that, and we have to be competitive in the marketplace, and that's the bottom line to me. We want to have good employees to serve the people of Roseville, and they expect that level of service. So it has to be comparable so we can hire good employees, maintain them.
Other discussion on the motion? I would just add that I think we want to make sure that that going forward, we're reviewing these types of data more frequently and trying to keep up with the marketplace better. I think there's a great deal of benefit, I think, to the discussions we had about who our comparables are in the marketplace, because that's going to hopefully make it easy to survey COLAs in coming years to help us as we make our decisions. I know in past discussions and other makeups of the council that I've been involved in, I think it was difficult to even come to an agreement as to who the comparables were, or what are we comparing. So that alone is something we should all be congratulating ourselves for accomplishing. But I think it does serve us in a moderate way, of course. But I think that does serve us well going forward, as I said, and I think that'll help from as it already I think is from the benefit side of it, and once again looking at specifically who are our comparables and not sort of casting a wider net that's difficult as benefits are to analyze between different entities. Having that focus on our comparables is going to be helpful in that regard too. So I'm supportive of this, and I think certainly there's a cost associated with it, and nobody up here is not cognizant of the impact to taxpayers. We are all taxpayers in that regard, and I think that in the context of everything else that's entering into our budget decision-making, knowing how important this is to be competitive in the marketplace and to keep our valued employees and to hire future valued employees, it is important to do, and so I'm supportive of it. Is there any other discussion on the motion? If not, we've got the motion before us to adopt the classification system, which includes the grade and step structure, and also to authorize the implementation plan as outlined. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that is approved.
Thank you very much.
Great, and thanks to everybody who's been involved in putting this together and going through this process, and hopefully, once again, because we've done it now, we've got a basis for doing it much more slickly in the future. With that, we have next on our agenda consideration of city council minutes. We have the minutes of our October 9th, some would call the infamous October 9th council meeting, to review, and we've got a draft in the packet that council members have had a chance to provide feedback on, and that is before us at this time. Any questions or discussion on the proposed minutes from the October 9th meeting, or a motion to approve?
Move approval.
You had some over here.
That's okay, we can do it when it happens. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Graff, second by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Graff?
No.
As the seconder, Councilmember Etten?
Yes. Under the public comment, we certainly had maybe an infamous public comment with folks not from our area commenting on things that didn't have to do with our work. While that was really unfortunate, I think it's important, the added text here, however that got added, I think is important to acknowledge that happened and kind of the process for how we responded to that. So I appreciate that was added to these minutes.
right, any other discussion on the motion? Right, hearing none, we've got the motion to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those minutes are approved. One other item related to that meeting, which I had some discussions with Mr. Trudgeon on, and that is the video record that we have currently available to the public. I'm a little concerned that right now we essentially go from, I don't even know if it shows me asking for public comment at the beginning of the meeting, but it just goes to after everything happened and just cuts out everything. And then, and I don't remember specific to the one particular obscene remark during the Applebee's item. I think that
It's cut. It's cut.
or it's completely cut the video section. So once again, I just wanted to bring to the council's attention, I'm a little concerned that that's excessively cut. You know, that there should be some more of a public record as to what happened. I think in the case of the earlier remarks, certainly those remarks, you know, they didn't use foul language necessarily,
No, they
other than
did.
to the extent that they did, that should be bleeped. But certainly, their views are not necessarily shared by a lot of people and are not necessarily views that are not going to be offensive to some people. But at the same time, I'm not sure that as a public entity, we can just sort of edit out all of that. Certainly, we have some control of it, and if I'm wrong about that, and we can just, you know, completely edit it out, I will stand corrected. But I wanted to at least bring it to the council's attention as to how we might want to think about how that video is edited or expanded from what it is now. Councilmember Strawn.
I think it would be important as a record to have it internally. I'm not really comfortable with having it be shared externally, unless someone were to do a, you know, FOIA or something, they could, I don't know. But I feel like I feel like it would be encouraging others to act in a similar way by putting that out there. Also, there's just harm in some of the words and things that were said, so I have a real hard time with that being the public view of that particular meeting. Quite honestly, I'm thankful there is a transcript, because I pretty much was blacked out by the time it was done. I was just in such trauma of feeling like it was not a great thing. And so I think if someone unsuspectingly watched that and didn't know, I really would be really uncomfortable with that. But I do think, as far as the record of the council, it's probably important to keep it. But.
Right. Other discussion? Oh, Councilmember.
I might put forward that if we wanted to, certainly CTV could cut in with the text that is in, that we just approved.
Like as a card on the screen?
Essentially, you know, it could be a scrolling piece or, you know, a couple of windows that happen so that people had time to read it. But for online participants who you know, that could certainly be there. I agree that even if the words weren't always something that would come across in a certain dictionary as wrong, there were a lot of attacks in verbal language that is highly inappropriate for our council meeting, or really anywhere in our world, I wish. And so I don't feel like I would want to have someone go through and keep parts of that and cut this and that, but rather something like this scrolled there in that place would again recognize that this has happened. Here's kind of how we dealt with it. Here's the meeting, and here are the things that are relevant to the citizens of Roseville.
I don't want them to be able to applaud themselves as having won some contest for getting in, having their voices and their names be acknowledged, whatever, made up or otherwise. I guess I just don't want them to have an opportunity to have any credibility to that opportunity. I just feel like that gives them the impetus to try it again.
And actually, I hadn't thought of that approach Councilman Bratton suggested. I think that might make some sense to just insert that as some scrolling text at that point in the initial public comment. And I'm not so concerned necessarily about the very brief, very inappropriate comment during the Applebee's testimony, but perhaps that way of handling the other. And frankly, maybe the text from the minutes related to the Applebee's might be able to be inserted in that section too, to handle that. But that might be a way, unless there's objection, that might be a way to go from sort of as if it didn't happen, which I don't think is accurate and doesn't feel right, to, you know, putting too much out there that can cause people to have concerns. So if there is an objection, maybe that's what we can direct staff to do, work with CTV to add those two bits of text to those two areas. Sounds like there's no objection. Mr. Treasurer?
Yeah, we'll figure out exactly how to do it, but yeah, I think there's ways to do that. And I would say that we also have the full copy internally, so we have the full version. It's just what we put on the city website.
Sure.
Had been edited with that removed, but if we insert, like you said, some text at some point and just use the same language, I think we can accommodate that pretty quickly.
I think that helps. I wanted to make sure that we weren't sort of presenting a version that was so cleaned up that you didn't even know, that something happened. I think that was my concern. So I appreciate the conversation about it and indulging a little extra time at this meeting to discuss that. So it sounds like we've got direction to follow up then on the part of staff. Sorry.
It's almost done.
We're very close to being done. All right. With that, unless there's anything else on the minutes, Mr. Trudgeon, the remaining items on the consent agenda with the exception of item E.
Yes, thank you. Item 10A approves payments in the amount of $3,118,126.28. Item 10B approves the purchase of a police vehicle scheduled for delivery in 2024. Item 10C receives the quarterly grant update. So far, there's been $1,488,472 awarded in 2023 and put to use. Item 10D approves a pathway transfer agreement with Southman of Roseville Homeowners Association, a private pathway that was part of the original development in 1997. Will be reconstructed by the association to city standards, and under this agreement, the city will be taking over ownership and maintenance of the pathway between Albemarle Court and Burke Avenue. Item 10E was taken up earlier. Item 10F approves plans for Phase 2 of the Twin Lakes Trail Project into Oasis Park and authorizes staff to advertise to receive bids for the project. Item 10G approves a resolution accepting the work completed for the 2023 pavement management project, starting the one-year warranty period and authorizing final payment of the project. Item 10H receives the feasibility report and orders a public hearing for November 6th for the County Road B reconstruction project. Item 10I approves entering into a grant agreement with the City of St. Paul for the Towards Zero Death program aimed at reducing traffic crashes that result in injuries and death. These funds will be used to pay for overtime for our police officers to enforce several programs like Click It or Ticket and Safe and Sober Impaired Driver details. And finally, item 10J approves the 2023-2024 wellness program for employees. The wellness program is an important factor in keeping our health insurance costs lower through the promotion of healthy activities for the city employees. The cost of the program is reimbursed by our insurance pool provider. And that is the consent agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion from the council with respect to the consent agenda with the exception of item E?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the exception of item E signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved or accepted. Next is the future agenda review, communications, reports, announcements, and councilmember-initiated items. And Mr. Trudgeon, as always, will start with the future agenda review.
Yeah, I won't read everything on here. This is in your packet. Our next meeting is November 6th. We'll have an EDA meeting as well as a regular council meeting. We have a couple bigger items, the County Road B feasibility study and assessment hearing I mentioned earlier. Talk about the fee schedule and utility rates, a presentation by the Community Action Team. You may have noticed you've getting some emails, and the presentation is not about funding, it's just a presentation of the work done to date here, so just so you're aware. We'd also mention that we'll expect to have the SRO contract with Roseville Schools in front of the council for approval. Then after that, we just have 2 meetings the rest of the year where we'll be focusing mostly on budget and levy and the final approvals of all those documents. So that's the future agenda item. I did want to bring up one item real quick. Staff had been contacted in September. I believe the mayor was contacted by the Roseville Area Youth Hockey Association looking for the possibility of having additional lawful gambling premises permit. Currently, our city code allows for up to one particular user to have up to 3 places. That was amended in 2016 from 2 to 3. We currently have 12 licenses available, 9 are being taken. They're asking apparently for a 4th one. To do that, we would need to amend the ordinance and have some consideration. So while there hasn't been a formal request necessarily that I've received in writing for it to be considered as something that has been brought up to us and wondering if the council would like us to put it on a future agenda for consideration, or give me some other direction on how to proceed with that.
Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon, and yeah, I had received some contact about it as well. And I think, the system is that we've got 12 premises permits. So the 12 entities in the city can do lawful gambling like pull tabs and those types of things for charitable purposes. And then within the law, we have a limit that any individual entity that's receiving the benefits can only have up to what was 2 and then was amended to 3 for this organization. 3 of those 12 or up to 12 establishments. So right now, I think there's 9 premises.
9 out,
and
yeah.
they have 3 of them, which is the max they can have. I'm not sure that we limit whether a premise can have more than one organization.
I don't believe so.
Right,
but-
but we do limit any given organization from having more than 3. And certainly, one of the reasons for that was the notion of trying to make sure we're not sort of having one entity dominate all of our charitable giving at these various places. So the question I think Mr. Trudgeon is asking the council is, do we want to put on the agenda for the future to discuss going up to maybe 4, basically based on what this entity is looking to do, or are we satisfied with the current system and not put it on an agenda?
Yes, and maybe for fairness, if the council's not interested in putting it forward, I could reach out to them saying if there's a formal request, we can bring that forward at that time, but,
Yeah, this would be sort of proactive.
Yeah.
Just based on the contact they made with us. Any thought from the council as to whether we want to put that on an agenda or wait to hear from them, any kind of specific request?
I'd rather see something specific from them.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I don't want to just preemptively allow one group to monopolize. I'm sure that's why that was originally placed there.
And we did just raise to 3, was that 2 years ago?
2016. Yeah.
Oh, that's more than 2 years
Yeah,
ago. Okay.
seems just like yesterday. Right.
I'll
Thank
reach
you,
out to
thank you
them.
for that. Are there any other council member initiated items for future meetings or announcements or reports from council members? All right. With that, the only thing left on our agenda is a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Droff, seconded by Councilmember Etten. To adjourn, no discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we're adjourned at 9 PM. Thank you, everyone.